Chapter 962. Night fell, and the breeze on the grassland brought with it a bone-chilling temperature, like fine knives scratching people's faces. Tonight's atmosphere was particularly heavy, and almost every patrolling guard's face was tense. In the middle of the night, the Imperial Guards changed shifts again. This time, they were all new faces. The fourth prince wore a full suit of armor, with a big knife hanging at his waist. He looked like the king of the northern borderline. Dressed like this, he looked majestic, like a lion patrolling its territory. "Has everything been arranged?" he asked his confidant patiently again. "What time is it now?" The confidant said, "It's just midnight, and there's still a quarter of an hour before the ninth prince's appointed time." A quarter of an hour? The fourth prince felt that every second was like a year. Seeing that his long-cherished wish was about to be fulfilled, he couldn't even wait for a quarter of an hour. Check everywhere again. We must make sure that nothing goes wrong. He paced back and forth, and seemed to think of something. He called his subordinate back. "Where's Mr. Sun?" At such an important moment, he hoped that someone would witness it with him. If Sun Wen was there, he would feel more at ease. In the fourth prince's mind, this strategist who played with the political situation of the northern borderline was miles ahead of the wise men of the northern borderline. The confidant said, "Mr. Sun said that he was old and couldn't bear to see blood, so he went back." After hearing this, the fourth prince's mouth twitched. He didn't know what to do with Sun Wen. He forgot that Sun Wen was a weak scholar who couldn't carry anything with his hands or shoulders. If a bloody battle broke out later, no one could guarantee his safety if he stayed here as a scholar, so it was better that he didn't come. Let him be. Anyway, the general situation had been decided. It didn't matter whether Sun Wen was there or not. The fourth prince was a suspicious person, so he couldn't help but go to the king's tent to see that the king of the northern borderline was still in bed. Time passed, and it was finally the appointed time. The fourth prince's heart beat like a drum, and he became more and more nervous. However, why was there no one? Several confidants came to report that all the checkpoints were guarded by their own people, but they didn't see the ninth prince's people at all. What was going on? This ninth prince, did he have too much fun with his wife, so he was late? The fourth prince murmured to himself. He didn't dare to slack off. He ordered his men to guard the various checkpoints. He couldn't let his guard down. After the appointed time, the people who had been highly nervous gradually felt tired. The fourth prince clenched and unclenched his fists. Finally, he could not help but want to get up. He hadn't even taken 2 steps when he faintly heard the sounds of killing. His eyes widened in joy. However, before the smile on his face faded, dozens of his subordinates rushed in, covered in blood. The one leading them was his trusted aide. "Your Highness, we've been tricked, let's go." His confidant's words made the fourth prince's heart skip a beat, and an ominous premonition filled the air. "Wait, what do you mean?" The fourth prince supported his trusted subordinate subconsciously. The special rattan armor on the man's body had been cut by the sharp blade. His flesh was exposed, and blood was flowing out. He said emotionally, "What do you mean by we've been tricked?" The confidant raised his hand and tied a piece of cloth around his waist to stop the wound. The guards who rushed in from the outside firmly protected the fourth prince. Just as his subordinate was about to explain, the shouts were getting closer and closer. The fourth prince saw that his private army, which he had carefully trained, was losing ground. As they retreated, they left behind several corpses. The enemies outside were menacing, and the fourth prince could only lead his men to fight and retreat, until they were near the king's tent. The fourth prince's confidant was a man from the northern frontier. His face was stained with blood, and his eyes were slightly red, almost crying. "Your Highness, there's no coercion at all, we've been tricked." Even a fool could see that something was wrong, not to mention that the fourth prince was not a fool at all. "There's no coercion. If there's no coercion, if the ninth prince had not coerced him, then he would have used his power to transfer the guards of the king's tent and replace them with his own people, wouldn't that be?" After a fierce battle, the fourth prince's thousands of elites were killed by 80%, and the rest were also defeated soldiers. Seeing that they were about to be forced into the king's tent, suddenly hundreds of executioners rushed out of the king's tent and cooperated with the pursuers to stop them. The fourth prince's thoughts turned quickly, and he vaguely guessed something. He was so angry that his molars creaked. He had fallen into the ninth prince's trap. Watching the people around him die one after another, but the enemies were increasing in number and getting closer and closer, the fourth prince was powerless to reverse the situation. Fourth brother, I really didn't expect you to do such a crazy thing, forcing the emperor to abdicate and commit patricide. The shouts gradually subsided. There were corpses and broken limbs all around, and the ground was muddy with blood. The air was filled with the smell of blood. The fourth prince stared in a certain direction, and the crowd that surrounded them parted to reveal a familiar figure. The person who forced the emperor to abdicate and commit patricide is obviously you. The fourth prince clenched his molars in anger, and he was so angry that his eyes were about to crack. Fourth brother, it's already like this, and you still want to lie with your eyes open? The ninth prince laughed contemptuously. One by one, the ministers of the imperial court stood behind him and looked at the fourth prince with complicated gazes. Some were disappointed, some were angry, some were indifferent, some were shocked, but no one trusted him. You changed the guards near the king's tent and secretly replaced them with your own people. You even wore armor and carried a sword, and you dare say that you didn't rebel? The ninth prince sneered, I received the news early in the morning. I didn't believe it at first, but I didn't expect that fourth brother would really do it. With so many people seeing it with their own eyes, what else does fourth brother have to say? If you hadn't come early, fourth brother would have forced father to make you the crown prince, right? The fourth prince felt a chill. The ninth prince said again, if fourth brother didn't have any rebellious intentions, why did you kill my people when you saw them? The fourth prince retorted, I received the news that you wanted to abdicate and commit patricide, so I specially arranged for people to stop you in advance. The ninth prince looked up to the sky and laughed, tears almost coming out of his eyes. The other ministers of the northern borderline could not bear to look at him and turned their faces away. They didn't know whether the ninth prince had any rebellious intentions, but they saw the irrefutable evidence that the fourth prince wanted to abdicate and commit patricide. Now that he was caught, he didn't repent and instead found such a lame excuse to quibble. The ninth prince sneered, fourth brother, you can't do this even if you slander your younger brother. You'd better say this in front of father. The fourth prince felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. He looked at the ninth prince with some horror in his eyes, as if he didn't know his younger brother. Fourth brother, the ninth prince walked up to the fourth prince. The others had already been subdued, and the fourth prince was also tied up like a dumpling. Bah! The fourth prince spat at his face. Fourth brother, don't be angry. The ninth prince raised his hand to wipe away the spit in a good mood, and stuck it on the fourth prince's face, distorting his facial features. He pinched the fourth prince's chin with his other hand and sneered, do you know how you lost? The fourth prince suddenly opened his eyes wide. That's because fourth elder brother treated my trusted aide as his own aide. Sun One? Sun One is your man? Chapter 963. The king of the northern borderline, who had finally fallen asleep after taking the tranquilizer, woke up from his nightmare. He smelled blood. Someone, what's going on outside? He had a nightmare. He dreamt that someone was holding a knife to kill him. When he woke up, he smelled the thick smell of blood in the air. He was terrified and quickly called for help. After calling for a long time, there was no one until the ninth prince, dressed in plain clothes, lifted the curtain and entered the tent. He smiled and knelt down respectfully. Father, fourth brother brought people to force the king to abdicate. Now he has been captured by me and a group of ministers, waiting for your judgment. The king of the northern borderline took a long time to digest this news. His chest seemed to be blocked by something. His eyes dimmed and he fainted. The ninth prince smiled, his eyes flashing with a cold light. Although the king of the northern borderline did not die, he suffered a stroke. Other than his eyeballs, which could still move, he could not move. The fourth prince, who forced the king to abdicate, committed suicide. Whether it was suicide or not, only the ninth prince knew. He finally had a taste of power. Finally, he did not have to pretend to be stupid to win the king's favor. He could show his talent. Where's Mr. Sun? After dealing with various matters overnight and killing the remnants of the fourth prince, the ninth prince finally remembered the greatest hero. Sun won. If not for this person's plan, how could the ninth prince defeat his 8 ruthless brothers and have the last laugh? Sun Won and the ninth prince had very little contact. The two only got together because of Herench's cover. The ninth prince did not believe Sun Wen's suggestion to use the fourth prince and was always guarded against him. Now that he saw the benefits that the other party brought him, he no longer doubted it. If he could not use such a good talent, he could not keep him. I don't know. Forget it. When I have settled things, I will personally go to ask for your forgiveness. In his heart, it was naturally more important to stabilize the power in his hands. Everything else had to wait. Anyway, Sun Wen could not run away. In fact, not only did Sun Wen run away, he ran very fast. Cough, cough, cough. Can you slow down a little? This old man can't stand the jolting. Sun Wen saw that the time was right. He secretly transferred his earned property and ran away with Wei Si's trusted caravan. As soon as he got on the carriage, Sun Wen regretted it. The jolting of the carriage made him hurt all over. The coachman was also helpless. They were in a hurry and had to return to Chongzhou in the shortest time possible. There was no time to waste. Although they didn't know what Sun Wen had done in the northern borderline, they didn't dare to slight him since the higher-ups thought so highly of him. The coachman said, "Sir, please bear with it a little longer. You'll be fine once we reach the border." Sun Wen was an old man who had suffered a lot. He couldn't bear hardship. Sigh. This old man's small body is going to fall apart. Sun Wen thought about what he had done in the northern borderline all these years and could only grit his teeth and bear with it. No matter how bumpy it was, he could not complain about being tired. If they were captured by the northern borderline, dismemberment by 5 horses would be considered a light punishment. Even burning their bones and scattering their ashes would not appease their hatred. The caravan did not dare to cause any trouble, so they secretly smuggled Sun Wen out of the northern borderline under the cover of the goods. They had been doing business all year round and had already bribed the entire border of the northern borderline. It would not be a problem for them to smuggle someone in. Sun Wen's face was pale as he looked at the impregnable border, but his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. It was great that he had returned alive. Sun Wen had been in Jiang Pengji's camp for a few years, but he had never seen his lord. It was rather strange. "Allow me to take a bath and wash up first, lest I offend my lord." Sun Wen spoke in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Jiang Pengji arranged for Sun Wen to live in a spacious house and a quick-witted servant. Sun Wen revealed his identity. The middle-aged man who looked like a housekeeper bowed with his hands folded in front. "Your servant greets my lord." "Grandfather," a familiar, heavenly voice assaulted his eardrums. Sun Wen had just entered the inner court when a figure in blue and white rushed into his arms. "I-oh. Grandfather's darling, Lon Lon." Sun Wen took a small step back to protect his grandson. He still felt like he was in a dream. "Lon Lon, weren't you in Wanzhou? Why did you come to Chongzhou?" Sun Wen hugged his grandson and looked at him intently. His grandson, who had been thin and tanned, had now grown into a cute and mellow figure. One could faintly see his future elegance from his facial features. Fortunately, his grandson looked like his son when he was young. Otherwise, Sun Wen would not have been able to recognize him. "Let grandfather see." Sun Wen was so excited that tears streamed down his face. Grandfather's grandson has grown taller, fairer, and fatter. Sun Lon was a little shy as he pinched his sleeves and said, "Lon, or Mrs. Grandfather. The academy is on holiday, so grandson begged Fengyi to come with me to Chongzhou. Fengyi? Who's that? Sun Wen was startled. A friend I met in Wanzhou. He's also my classmate. Sun Wen was relieved. He was willing to be enslaved and blackmailed by Wei Ci so that his grandson could grow up safely and happily. Sun Lan had gone to the academy to make friends. Even his shy and reserved personality had become a little more cheerful. This comforted him greatly. However, you came with that Fengyi? Two little kids came all the way from Wanzhou to Chongzhou. Sun Lan smiled and shook his head, revealing a few missing teeth. Fengyi and Jinghui's fathers are both in Chongzhou. They haven't seen their father for many years. They came to see their father. I also miss grandfather, so after asking, I came with them. Sun Wen frowned. He could already tell that Fengyi and Jinghui's parents were not simple. Who is Jinghui? It sounded like the name of a little girl. Sun Lan lowered his head and shyly moved closer to Sun Wen's ear. She's my classmate. Sun Wen knew that his grandson was studying at the Golden Scale Academy. The teachers there were almost all famous scholars, and the academy's faculty was strong. Sun Wen could not be more satisfied with this arrangement. It seemed that Sun Lan was well taken care of in Wanzhou. His efforts in the northern borderline were not in vain. As they were talking, two children, one tall and one short, came out of the house. The tall one was a boy, about 10 years old. He was young but already had a graceful bearing. The short one was a girl. Although she was young, she had a good demeanor. Her eyes were clear and lively. No one knew which family she was from. Sun Lan introduced them. Grandfather, this is my classmate, Fengyi, and this is Qiguan Jinghui. Greetings, Elder Sunday. Fengyi and Qiguan Jinghui bowed to Sun Wen at the same time. At that moment, Sun Wen noticed the two children's surnames. Feng. Qiguan. Sun Wen had never met Jiang Pengji, but he had studied her background. With a glance, the two children in front of him were the children of Lu Shi's capable advisors. If his grandson interacted with them more, it would only benefit him more. He was old, and he did not know how many years he could live. If Lan Lan could build a good relationship with the people around her, she could take care of her in the future. However, before he died, he would do his best to build a career. This would be his grandson's capital. Thinking of this, Sun Wen's hand secretly brushed the front of his shirt. The inner shirt was a little thick. If one did not touch it carefully, one would not notice it. He had sewn an extremely important item inside and secretly brought it out of the northern borderline. Chapter 964. Lan Lan, these two classmates of yours are pretty good. Get along well with them in the future. Don't throw a tantrum. To put it more realistically, Feng Yi and Qiguan Jinghui were the second generation of power. If Jiang Pengji developed further, they might become the pillars of the next generation. Now that they had established a good relationship, would they still need to worry about not having a guarantee in the future? In the past, Sun Wen doted on his grandson and could not bear to impose the secular thoughts of an adult on his child. After the big change, he had no choice but to change his mind. He was already in his 40s. In a few more years, he would be an old man. Who knew how long he would be able to accompany his child? If he passed away, Sun Lan would truly be alone in this world. She would no longer have any relatives to rely on and could only rely on her friends. Sun Lan nodded sensibly. I know, Grandpa. I will get along well with Jinghui and the others. And, be good. Sun Wen used his calloused hands to caress his grandson's tender little face, full of gratification. Come, Grandpa will test Lan Lan to see if you have studied well. Sure, Grandpa, go ahead. Sun Wen was in charge of Sun Lan's education. Even when the two of them were at their most difficult times, he did not slack off on Sun Lan's education. He knew that his grandson was young, so the questions were not difficult, but his grandson's performance surprised him. Grandpa's sweetheart is Lan Lan. the student has surpassed the master. You are much smarter than your father. Sun Wen was so happy that his eyes lit up. A smile blossomed on his face as he praised his grandson generously. He himself was a typical late bloomer. When he was young, it was extremely difficult for him to learn. His son was also slow and slow-witted, and didn't seem to have much talent in learning. When it came to Sun Lan's generation, Sun Wen was also worried. Could it be that this child was also mediocre in intelligence? After the Enlightenment, reality gave Sun Wen a huge blow. The slowness of a lineage of inheritance. Learning everything was strenuous. He did not despise his grandson for being stupid. He was just worried that Sun Lan was too mediocre and would be easily bullied in the future. If that wasn't the case, Sun Wen wouldn't have risked his life to accumulate merit points. He only hoped that Jiang Pengji would treat Sun Lan well in the future on account of his great contribution. However, his grandson had given him a great surprise. This kind of surprise gave him a greater sense of accomplishment than scheming against those idiots in the northern borderline. Sun Lan lowered his head. His face was flushed from the compliment, and he inadvertently revealed his cute canine teeth. There are still many things I don't understand. I need to study harder. Sun Lan was not arrogant. Instead, he reflected seriously. It couldn't be helped, Feng Yi, the top student, was swaying in front of him. With Sun Lan's basic foundation, she couldn't be arrogant in the Golden Scale Academy. Yes, that's right. You're not arrogant in victory, and you're not discouraged in defeat. You're worthy of being my good Lan Lan. Sun Wen patted his grandson's hair and said, if there's anything Lan Lan doesn't understand, you must ask and think more. Don't be afraid of being laughed at. Understanding is the most important thing. Sun Lan's personality was like that of her parents. She was shy and introverted. Sun Wen was worried that the other party would keep his questions to himself. That was not a good way to learn. Lan. Double quotes Lan. Lan nodded. Lan, Lan. Lan said, Lan, S, Lan, Feng, he, Lan, Feng, Lan, he, the. Sun Wen smiled. Sure. Tell me. Lan ran into the house and brought out a few books. Sun Wen frowned. The only reason was that the books Sun Lan used were all made of precious Xian paper, which was as precious as gold. This was not studying. It was burning money. He opened the book. His grandson's notes were written on the clean paper. Sun Wen felt his fingers tremble. He was not holding a book. He was holding a pile of gold. He could not help but be envious. If he had such a good learning environment as his grandson, he would not have to wait until he was in his 40s to achieve anything. Sigh. Sun Wen sat on the porch. He opened the book with one hand and hugged his grandson with the other. What are the questions? The questions that Sun Lan could not solve were child's play for Sun Wen. The answers were at his fingertips. Sun Wen enjoyed Sun Zhao's starry eyes. He smiled, which was rare. Grandpa, you're amazing. Sun Lan was not stingy with her admiration. Sun Wen was overjoyed. It was as if he had eaten a peach from the Queen Mother of the West. Lan Lan wants to be as amazing as Grandpa. She must study hard in the future. Sun Wen looked at the sky. He held his grandson's hand and went to the main hall for dinner. Seeing his grandson eat every grain of rice, Sun Wen felt gratified and sad at the same time. He was glad that the hard times were over. Their lives would be better in the future. Yes. He and Lan Lan could only live a better life when the Lord reached higher heights. After coaxing his grandson to sleep, Sun Wen got up to get a lamp. He took off his shirt and used a pair of scissors to cut open his shirt and took out the contents. He had read the contents over and over again countless times and was already familiar with them. He sat there until dawn. After washing up, he changed into a new set of clothes and tidied himself up from head to toe. Just as he was about to leave, his grandson was already ready. "You're up so early. Why don't you sleep a little longer?" Sun Lan said, "I have an appointment with Feng Yi and the others to do morning exercises." 2 carriages were parked outside the door. A familiar head popped out of the curtains. "Good morning, Mr. Sunday." The one who spoke was Qiguan Jinghui. Feng Yi was old-fashioned. He wouldn't do something as rude as sticking his head out of the curtains. She got out of the carriage gracefully and Feng Yi bowed. Sun Wen secretly raised his eyebrows. He heard that Feng Yi's father, Feng Zhen, was a complete wastrel. Now that he saw it, the rumors couldn't be trusted. "Yes. Jinghui." An unfamiliar voice came from the carriage. It sounded stern. Qiguan Jinghui was so scared that he shrank his neck and quickly stuck his head back. "Father." Sun Wen heard the voice and guessed, the man in the carriage must be Qiguan Rang. The curtains of the other carriage opened, revealing a slightly gloomy and thin man's face. He looked at Sun Wen and invited him with a smile. "You must be Sun Wen, Mr. Sun Zidao, right? Zixiao was worried that you wouldn't know the way, so he asked us to bring you along." Jiang Pengji built houses wherever she went. Most of them were used to speculate on real estate and a small portion was used to reward her subordinates. Sun Wen's neighbors were Qiguan Rang and Feng Zhen. "Thank you for your hospitality." Seeing that Feng Zhen treated people warmly, Sun Wen's impression of him improved. Only Qiguan Rang secretly sneered. Feng Zhen was a drama queen. He was addicted to acting. The children went for a morning jog while the 3 adults went to the government office together. Sun Wen met his lord for the first time. Chapter 965. Sun Wen bowed in a serious manner. "Your subject, Sun Wen, greets my lord." It was rather uncomfortable for him to bow to a woman who was a few years younger than his own son. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "Zidao, you must be tired from the journey. Did you sleep well last night?" Sun Wen's expression did not change, but he felt indescribable in his heart. How many years had it been since someone called him that? "Very well. Thank you for your concern, my lord." Although Jiang Pengji could not do such a thing, she would not mistreat her own people. As a nouveau riche, she had always been extremely generous. Sun Wen had not yet arrived in Chongzhou, but she had already prepared a large number of rewards. Zidao has worked hard and made great contributions. It was not easy for him to return safely from the dangerous northern borderline. "Today, I should hold a banquet to welcome you." Sun Wen said a few humble words before thanking her. Today was not only Jiang Pengji's first time seeing Sun Wen, but it was also the first time the viewers in the streaming room saw the legendary Prince Charming Grandpa Sunday, Qihua Jiqiu. "Hey, I thought Prince Charming's son was very old, but he's clearly a middle-aged uncle." Sun Wen lived a happy life in the northern borderline. From his appearance, he did not seem to be much different from his age. He was clearly a man in his early 40s, at the age when his charm was at its peak, but he was already a grandpa? How could the superstar celebrities, who had only gotten married and become fathers in their 50s, endure this? The Fairy Queen's crimson, thumbs up. "You are indeed a streamer who has a face complex. You gather handsome men, and none of them are ugly." It was not that Sun Wen was good-looking. His facial features could only be considered a straight face, but with his temperament, his charm increased greatly. Temperament was something that could not be touched or seen, but it definitely existed. Zuiyin Catyao, to the commenter above, "If you say that, Qi Kuang and the rest will be heartbroken." Mingxing Zhu, congratulations to the streamer for obtaining another think tank. Yinuagia Zhuga Qinma, a group of superficial fans. Am I the only one who noticed that a storm is brewing? Gui Kai Guofengxiu, Sun Wen is a multifaceted spy that Wei Ci sent to the northern borderline. Now that he has returned safely, it means that the situation in the northern borderline has reached Wei Ci's initial expectations. Perhaps the northern borderline is already crippled. The streamer can sharpen her knife to conquer the northern borderline after spring. Big shots were big shots. Their questions always went straight to the heart of the matter. The idle spectators could only join in the fun. Just as the big boss in the streaming room analyzed, Jiang Pengji's sword was hungry and thirsty. She introduced Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang to Sun Wen. On the surface, the three of them seemed to be getting along well. Jiang Pengji had already decided to let the three of them and Wei Ci lead the battle at the north borderline. The other strategists would guard the rear to resist any possible sneak attacks. She wasn't worried about Wei Ci, but she was worried that Feng Zhen and Sun Wen wouldn't get along. From the looks of it now, she no longer had to worry. She inquired about the situation in the north borderline in detail, and Sun Wen answered them one by one. After a while, Sun Wen stepped out of the ranks, raised a brocade box with both hands, and said in a clear voice, "I have something to offer my lord." Jiang Pengji took it with a smile and opened the box. There was a thin piece of paper inside. Seeing Jiang Pengji take it with her bare hands, someone in the audience sent a bullet scream. Yi Wu Yanling, if the paper was smeared with poison, it would be a miracle. Sun Wen is probably the most successful super spy. As it turned out, a brain hole was still a brain hole. Jiang Pengji took out the piece of paper and carefully unfolded it. A complete map of the north borderline was drawn on it. Sun Wen said, "This is the map of the north borderline. On it are the locations of each tribe, the oases, and the general distribution of their military forces." His words shocked Feng Zhen so much that he jumped up. Qiguan Rang's reaction was still considered calm, but he also tightened his grip on the handle of his fan. The map of the north borderline? Good, good, good. Jiang Pengji was overjoyed. She said, "Good," 3 times in a row. She smiled and said, "Zidao is indeed my Lu Shang." In order to attract Wei Ci's attention, Sun Wen had called himself Lu Shang. Now that he had received such an evaluation from Jiang Pengji, he didn't really boast too much. The streaming room was also in an uproar. "Yusue Jiao, my prince son is amazing. You can be called the strongest 007 of the generation. Even 007 is not as good as you." How could he not be good? He was ordered to go undercover in the north borderline in the face of danger. Not only did he play the north borderline in the palm of his hand, but he also took away their war secrets after he escaped unscathed. He was so good that he could fly to the sky and stand shoulder to shoulder with the sun. Feng's remembrance, I've decided. Idol's son is my idol. I'm going to be his fan. Taste of chili sticks. Does Sun Lan Lan still need a grandmother? A large wave of fans swarmed towards Sun Wen. In an instant, his popularity shot up to the top, easily establishing his position in Jiang Pengji's heart. Ancient communication technology was backward, and information and intelligence could determine the outcome of a war. It could be said that whoever had the advantage of intelligence would be the dominant party in the war. Sun Wen bowed in a neither servile nor overbearing manner and returned to his seat. He looked calm, but he was actually overwhelmed with emotions. He was so excited that his palms were sweaty. He had achieved the effect he wanted. He had not wasted the huge risk he had taken to steal the intelligence. Just this contribution alone was enough to guarantee Lan Lan a high position and wealth for the rest of her life. Parents loved their children, and they had far-reaching plans. His grandfather was the same. He was Lan Lan's last closest relative in the world. If he did not plan for Lan Lan, who else would take care of this poor child? Feng Zhen was speechless. He secretly asked Qiguan Rang, where did Wei Zixiao find such a demon? What kind of late bloomer was this? Whose late bloomer could be so terrifying? Didn't you say that Sun Zidao came looking for them himself? Qiguan Rang replied in a low voice, I should say that the Nye family of Zhongzhao provoked a demon. No matter what, it's beneficial for us. With Sun Wen's help, it's not impossible to conquer the northern borderline. From Wei Ci, they knew that Sun Wen had fallen to such a state because of the Nye family of Zhongzhao. If Sun Wen was really an ordinary old man, it would have been fine, but he was a late bloomer. He could easily plot against the Nye family. Little did they know that Sun Wen was supposed to be the most intelligent person in the Nye family's camp. Feng Zhen secretly broke into a cold sweat for the Nye family. Based on Sun Wen's determination to plot for his grandson, he must have cherished his family very much. The Nye family had destroyed his family. If he had the chance, would Sun Wen let go of his enemies? Absolutely not. Although she had received the confidential documents, Jiang Pengji did not immediately gather people to discuss military affairs. Instead, she sent people to prepare a welcoming banquet. Sun Wen had just arrived. He knew no one but Wei Ci, but that did not prevent him from quickly becoming familiar with Feng Zhen and the others. Smart people always had a lot to talk about, even if Sun Wen was a generation older than Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang. After chatting for a while, Sun Wen realized that he was wrong. He had thought that Feng Zhen was a warm and gentle gentleman, but after getting to know him up close, he turned out to be an unrestrained and free-loving wastrel. Could he have a bit of the moral integrity of a drama queen and put on a full act? Eating, drinking, gambling, and smoking, was there anything that he did not know how to do? How did a father like this raise a good seedling like Feng Yi, who was elegant and dignified? Sun Wen's mind came up with a very appropriate sentence. Her snow-white face was covered in dust. Yo, you're all here. Do you want to try their cooking? Jiang Pengji shook the kebab that was almost burnt black in her hand. It was Sun Lan's finished product. The taste was indescribable. Sun Wen looked at his lord sitting on the ground without a care for her image, and he couldn't help but lose control of his mouth. The majesty of the lord was completely gone. Seeing that the head of the family had arrived, the three children didn't know whether to bow or not. They could only awkwardly hold on to the skewers. Sun Wen wanted to call his grandson over to prevent him from offending Jiang Pengji due to his ignorance. However, he had just arrived and Qiguan Rang and Feng Zhen hadn't spoken yet, so it was not appropriate for him to speak first. Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang's reactions were also very unique. It was in line with their personalities. Feng Zhen grinned and joined the ranks of exploiting child labor. He openly took away the fruits of his son's barbecue and commented on it. It's too burnt. The sauce isn't evenly applied, and the taste is strong. Be more careful next time. Qiguan Rang's face was solemn. His gaze drifted to his daughter, silently sending her a message. Qiguan Jinghui threw down the firewood and took out a handkerchief to wipe her hands. She raised her head and tugged at Qiguan Rang's sleeve. Father, that's not how you start a fire. You have to be skillful. Qiguan Rang and his daughter were not talkative. They always gave people the illusion that they communicated with their brain waves. Sun Wen was speechless. He felt that he should do something to not stand out. Barbecue couldn't be used as lunch. Jiang Pengji had already asked the kitchen to prepare a light lunch. After sending the three children to take an afternoon nap, Jiang Pengji asked Feng Zhen. Did Zixiao say when he'll be back? Feng Zhen thought about it and said, he said he'll be back in 3 to 5 days. Looking at the time, he'll be back in 1 or 2 days. Sun Wen then remembered that he hadn't seen Wei Ci since he arrived in Chongzhou. Zixiao went out for business? Feng Zhen shook his head and said, Zixiao said that a friend is coming. He went out to visit him. Sun Wen thought about it and subconsciously felt that something was wrong. Since his friend is coming, why would Zixiao go out for 3 to 5 days? Logically speaking, if a friend came from afar, shouldn't Wei Ci host a banquet at home? Feng Zhen glanced at his lord and said with a faint smile, I'm not sure about that. Since Jiang Pengji didn't ask about it, they naturally couldn't interfere. They could only wait for Wei Ci to come back and ask. Feng Zhen said uncertainly, but Zixiao did say that this friend is called Immortal Yoru. I heard he's from Zhongzhou. Immortal Yoru? Sun Wen felt that the name was very familiar. Fengzhen saw his reaction and asked, "Does Zidao know this person?" Sun Wen remembered who Taoist Master Liru was. Reverend Liuru is the former abbot of Zhongzhao's Monastery of Salvation, as well as a high priest of the imperial family. To think that Zixiao is acquainted with such an expert. Zhongzhao's state religion was Taoism. Jinren Liuru was said to be of royal blood. He was the master of the largest Taoist temple in Zhongzhao. As far as Sun Wen knew, after enlightened Liru celebrated his 60th birthday, he relinquished his position as the abbey dean and lived in seclusion. This person was over 60 years old. Why would he come to Chongzhou from Zhongzhao? Fengzhen was speechless. Taoist Master Liru actually has such a great background? How did Zixiao know him? Wei Ci did not know enlightened Liuru in this life, but he did in his previous life. Master Liaochen once told Jiang Pengji that there were less than 5 people in the world who could see the emperor's aura at a glance. Coincidentally, Taoist Master Liru was one of them. Wei Ci was dressed in a green Confucian robe, a dark green cloak, a cloud scarf on his head, and wooden clogs on his feet. He looked like a leisurely refined scholar who was far away from the world. Opposite him sat a white-haired Taoist with a youthful complexion. He wore a Taoist robe and held a horsetail whisk in his hand. The two of them were fighting fiercely on the chessboard. "Immortal, your chess skills are superb. I concede defeat." Wei Ci's chess skills were not bad, but he was no match for enlightened Liuru. Not to mention now, even in his previous life, he often lost to him. Enlightened Liuru smiled faintly and cupped his hands, as if winning or losing was just a fleeting cloud to him. "If not for the fact that you had something on your mind and allowed me to take advantage of you, I'm afraid this game would not have been so easy to win." Enlightened Liuru looked at Wei Ci with a kind gaze. He did not know Wei Ci, but when he saw the other's face, he knew that Wei Ci knew him. Chapter 967. Although the Lord Ziwei Emperor's qi had been increasing, if the thief had not stolen it, her fate would have been even more vigorous. Wei Ci was worried at the thought of this. In order to clarify the truth, he sent letters to several hermit masters. Master Liaochen did not leave Hejin County and the other masters were in seclusion. He only caught Jinren Liuru. Wei Ci did not dare to guarantee the level of the others, but Jinren Liuru was half his teacher and a role model in the world of charlatans. Jinren Liuru smiled as he cleaned up the chessboard. "Young friend, you are not in the game. You can just watch from the sidelines. Why are you upset?" Wei Ci shook his head and said, "Although I am not in the game, the most important person in this life is in deep trouble." How could he stand aside and watch from the sidelines when the Lord was in deep trouble? Jinren Liuru smiled and said, "Infatuation in the world of mortals." Wei Ci had an embarrassed look on his face, as if his thoughts had been seen through. "Young friend, please forgive me for being rude. You have already jumped out of the 3 realms and 5 elements. You have a great opportunity and the Emperor's qi to protect you. Why are you still in the world of mortals? Why not follow me to seek immortality and seek the Tao? You are free and unfettered." Jinren Liuru tried to coax Wei Ci to become a monk with him. It was a waste of such a good seedling to fight and scheme against each other. Wei Ci sighed, "What's the use of being outside the world of mortals? But my heart is in the world of mortals and is tied to that person." Jinren Liuru was cruelly fed a mouthful of dog food. He said, "Since you have made up your mind, it is not good for me to break you up." Wei Ci wanted to explain but Jinren Liuru said, "I read your letter carefully and know something." Wei Ci bowed and asked, "Jinren, please enlighten me." Jinren Liuru shook his head regretfully. He said, "I only have one suggestion for this matter. Let nature take its course and do not interfere." Wei Ci was puzzled, that evildoer stole the fate of the nation and the emperor's qi of others. How much sin did he commit? Jinren, why, Dongqing suffered from frequent natural disasters and many people suffered because of it. It was all because the fate of the nation was stolen. Jinren Liuru said, "It is for the sake of the common people that you should let nature take its course." Wei Ci wanted to get to the bottom of it. He said, "Please enlighten me, Jinren Huanqing. Your master, Lu Shi, is the chosen child of heaven. If there are no accidents, she will be the ruler of the world, right?" Although it was a question, Immortal Liru said it in a declarative tone. "The evildoer who stole the country's fate and the emperor's aura have a great fate and bond with your master. As for who he is, I can't tell because my cultivation is too shallow. I can only say that both of them will suffer." Wei Ci's eyes widened. How could this be? According to Reverend Liru's words, that demon couldn't be moved. Things will eventually sort themselves out, and the boat will naturally straighten itself out when it comes to the bridgehead. Young friend, you don't have to worry too much. This lord of yours has an extraordinary background. This tribulation is just a hurdle. It'll be fine once he gets over it. Enlightened Liru Ru smiled as he comforted Wei Ci. Since he's the ruler of the world, he has to go through hardships. Your master isn't an ordinary person. I'm afraid she already knows the identity and background of the demon and is secretly planning something. Wei Ci said dumbfoundedly, "I wish I could take his place." The unknown was the scariest. How could he not be worried when faced with these problems that didn't exist in his previous life? No matter how Wei Ci tried, Enlightened Liru Ru refused to reveal more information. It was really annoying. After 2 days, Wei Ci prepared to leave. Enlightened Liru Ru saw him off for a kilometer. Before leaving, he suddenly asked, "Young friend, do you know of Zhuangxing's dream of a butterfly?" Wei Ci didn't understand. He said, "In the past, Zhuangzhou dreamed of a butterfly. It was vivid and lifelike, but he didn't know Zhou." Suddenly, he realized that it was Zhou. Didn't he know that Zhou's dream was butterfly and butterfly's dream was Zhou? Is this the story you're talking about? Enlightened Liru Ru sighed. Yes, Zhuangxing dreamed of a butterfly dreamed of Zhuangxing. Young friend, remember this. Wei Ci was stunned. What did this mean? What was Enlightened Liru hinting at? Without waiting for him to think carefully, Enlightened Liru Ru said, "I observed the sky last night. The emperor's star shone and the north was auspicious. Young friend, you can rest assured." Wei Ci returned with a stomach full of doubts. However, according to Enlightened Liru Ru's instructions, the Lord had the ability to deal with that demon and should be safe. Even so, Wei Ci still felt uneasy. Why would the evildoer who stole the fate of the nation and the emperor's aura suffer together with his lord? He desperately wanted to return to her side. Only by seeing her well with his own eyes could he be completely at ease. Wei Ci did not know that not long after he left, Enlightened Liru's chest throbbed as if he had an ominous premonition. He calculated with his fingers, and his expression changed drastically. He quickly packed his luggage and ran off to travel. Taoist Master Liru had only left for half a day when a group of black-clothed men pounced on him. These people were not willing to give up. They searched the inside and outside of the thatched cottage, as if they were looking for something. If Xie Qian were here, he would realize that Reverend Liru was the mysterious master who gave him the Yin Yang jade pendant. At the same time, after Wei Ci returned and heard that Sun Wen had successfully completed the mission, he temporarily put these questions to the back of his mind. The most important matter now was still the northern borderline. As for the rest, they could talk about it later. "Greetings, my lord." As soon as he returned, he went to see Jiang Pengji. "Zixiao, you're back from visiting a friend?" Jiang Pengji asked. "You don't look worried. Did something difficult happen to you?" Wei Ci restrained his unnecessary expression and said, "Thank you for your concern, my lord. I'm fine." "That's good." Jiang Pengji did not expose him. Instead, she asked the kitchen to prepare lunch for Wei Ci and sent someone to invite Qiguan Rang and the others. Zidao completed his mission beyond expectations. He also brought back a map of the northern borderline, as well as the locations and approximate military strength of the various tribes in the northern borderline. With these, our chances of winning against the northern borderline will be greater. Since Zixiao is back, the war against the northern borderline should also be put on the agenda. Wei Ci widened his eyes in astonishment. He knew that Sun Wen was very powerful. Otherwise, he would not have been able to suppress a group of young talents and secure his position as the top strategist of the Nie family. However, he did not expect Sun Wen to be so good at playing the dirty game. He played the northern borderline in the palm of his hand all by himself. After Wei Ci finished his meal, Qiguan rang and the others arrived one after another. Jiang Pengji said, "I'm sure everyone knows why I've summoned all of you here today. The three tribes of the northern borderline have been eyeing the central plains covetously for a long time. If not for the horse plague, which caused a great loss in their military strength, I'm afraid they would have already sent their troops south. They are full of ambition. The central plains is divided and the feudal lords are fighting each other. It is difficult to guarantee that the northern borderline will not take this opportunity to launch a sneak attack. As the governor of Wanzhou, I am in charge of Chongzhou. I will definitely be the first enemy to be eliminated by the northern borderline. As the saying goes, the one who strikes first gains the upper hand. Instead of waiting for the northern borderline to recover, it is better to take the opportunity to start a war and take their lives." Chapter 968. The three tribes of the northern borderline were nomadic tribes, living in tribes for generations. Because of the characteristic of living by water, the mobility of the three tribes of the northern borderline was far greater than that of the farming tribes of the central plains. For this reason, the cohesiveness of individual tribes was very strong, but the cohesiveness between tribes was very poor. Most of the time, the tribes in the northern borderline would have fierce disputes over the ownership of a certain pasture, and it would even evolve into regional wars. The tribes of the northern borderline were like a sheet of loose sand. Even if they were terrifyingly aggressive, they still could not pose a substantial threat to the central plains. They were just scattered sand. What was there to be afraid of? The appearance of the northern border imperial court made up for this flaw. A long time ago, the northern border didn't have an imperial court. There were only three extremely powerful tribes. One generation had an ambitious successor. This person took the lead as the leader of the tribe, and the other two tribes responded. The three tribes joined forces to conquer the other tribes in the northern borderline. While fighting and plundering, they devoured their territory and population. After the unification, the imperial court was established in the northern borderline. The three major tribes agreed that the three tribes would take turns to be the king of the imperial court. This system was implemented very well at first, but the other two tribes were weakened because of the natural disaster, and their right to speak became smaller and smaller. In the end, the northern borderline royal family was the only one in power. The northern borderline royal family was thick-skinned, and simply changed the system of taking turns to be the banker to the next generation. The forces in the northern borderline were in turmoil, splitting and reuniting. Until today, the current king of the northern borderline, with the help of Wu Liba, had become the true leader of the resurgence. If not for the sudden arrival of the equine plague, perhaps the iron hooves of the northern borderline would have already trampled on the land of the central plains. Although the appearance of the imperial court had become the glue between the various tribes, the characteristics of the nomadic tribes hadn't changed. The people of the northern borderline were still used to living in tribes. Sun Wen saw through this, so he used a scheme to sow discord among the princes, causing unrest in the political situation of the northern borderline. Other than the fourth prince, who committed suicide to escape punishment, and the second prince, who was about to be sacrificed to the flag, the other princes of the northern borderline were scattered all over the northern borderline. Their actions further tore apart the harmony within the northern borderline, making it difficult for the troops everywhere to integrate. The northern borderline was like a hemp rope. If they worked together and exerted their strength in one direction, the combat power they could unleash could change the color of the sun and moon. If this hemp rope was divided into a dozen strands, an ordinary strong man would be able to break it with a single tug. It was no longer a dream to break through the northern borderline's defense line one by one. Jiang Pengji praised Sun Wen mercilessly. Not only did she praise him verbally, but she also rewarded him generously. Firstly, Sun Wen had made great contributions. He was worthy of this honor. Secondly, Sun Wen showed off his abilities as soon as he arrived. If Jiang Pengji did not back him up, there might be people who would make fun of him. The greater the power, the more complicated the personnel, and the higher the probability of conflict. Jiang Pengji didn't expect them to love each other. She just wanted them to do their jobs well and not be a burden to each other. She had been plotting against the northern borderline since she was 12 years old. Now, she had a strong army and sufficient provisions. Everything was ready except for the arrival of spring. Although it was said to be a discussion, the few of them gathered together to analyze the actual combat power of the northern borderline and various ways to deal with various emergencies. Sun Wen successfully entered the A-list and was doing very well, but the northern borderline was in an uproar. This could be traced back to a period of time ago. The ninth prince was the big winner who had the last laugh, and he could be said to be proud of himself. The old king of the northern borderline suffered a stroke, and the powerful minister Halunsha supported him with all his might. The ninth prince naturally became the crown prince and held great power. The taste of power is intoxicating. The ninth prince enjoyed it for a few days, and finally remembered that he hadn't seen Sun Wen for a few days. He went to visit him personally, but Sun Wen's tent was empty. Before he left, Sun Wen deliberately set up a diversion and tried to delay as much time as possible. Where is he? The ninth prince was dumbfounded. Although he didn't have much contact with Sun Wen, he had already relied on him for his divine strategy. The northern borderline still needed his assistance. His subordinate reported that not only was he gone, but Sun Wen's tent had also been violently rummaged through. Everything valuable was gone. It seems like it was done by the horse bandits, the subordinate said awkwardly. The ninth prince's mouth twitched. He said, horse bandits? Why would there be horse bandits at the place where Mr. Sun lives in seclusion? The subordinate said, but where Mr. Sun lives, there are indeed horse bandits causing trouble. The northern borderline had a vast territory, and horse bandits ran amok. Not only were the borders of Chongzhou deeply disturbed, but the herdsmen in the northern borderline also deeply hated horse bandits. These horse bandits didn't dare to attack the big tribes. At most, they would wander around the borders of the tribes. Sun Wen's identity was special. To reduce his presence and prevent others from noticing him, he asked to stay at the borders of the tribes. There were few people there, and it was hidden, so it was not easy to be discovered. The ninth prince understood everything and gritted his teeth. Find him. Even if I have to dig 3 feet underground, I have to find him. If he's alive, I want to see him. If he's dead, I want to see his corpse. He was still counting on Sun Wen to help him stabilize the imperial court and balance the various powers. After a deeper understanding, the ninth prince realized that the salted fish Herentia could make a comeback because of Sun Wen's meticulous planning. In other words, if Sun Wen was gone, Herentia's value would be greatly reduced. What use did he have for a salted fish? With Sun Wen's disappearance, the horse bandits in the northern borderline suffered. Dozens of horse bandits' nests were wiped out. However, no matter how many horse bandits' nests were wiped out, they couldn't find Sun Wen's whereabouts. At the same time, a few princes who had escaped to their fief rubbed their palms together, wanting to force the imperial court to hand over its power. This gave the ninth prince a headache. Have you found him? The ninth prince was also in a frenzy. The pressure from the imperial court and his brothers was almost crushing his spine. No, no. The subordinate who reported timidly said in a low voice. Trash, why aren't you going to find him? The ninth prince panted heavily. He lifted his hands and swept everything he could touch to the ground. As time passed, some people suspected that Sun Wen might not have been kidnapped by the horse bandits, but that he had run away. However, this reason was simply a joke in the eyes of the ninth prince. Sun Wen tried his best to help him rise to power, helping him get rid of one obstacle after another. He was about to succeed, so why would he run away? It didn't make sense at all. As time passed, no matter how unwilling the ninth prince was, he had to admit that something had happened to Sun Wen. Without Sun Wen's advice, how could the ninth prince deal with the sly old fox and his aggressive brothers in the court? The more forceful he was, the more it would rebound. At that moment, the northern borderline received a declaration of war against the northern borderline from Chongzhou. To a certain extent, it helped the ninth prince attract all the attention. This was the second declaration of war from Jiangpengji. Compared to the first warning, the wording this time was much harsher. It was a completely incompatible attitude. The ninth prince said this at the court meeting. The officials were in an uproar and everyone was anxious. Does anyone have a plan to deal with it? The ninth prince sat on the throne and looked around. The officials who met his gaze lowered their heads and closed their eyes, not daring to look him in the eye. Chapter 969. The ninth prince looked at the officials who were talking about him in court and felt very annoyed. If it was Mr. Sun Wen, he definitely wouldn't be vague or evasive. What was the use of keeping these useless people? Why don't we send someone to sue for peace? The northern borderline was very poor now and couldn't afford the funds needed for war. When the time came, wouldn't they have to take military funds from the various tribes? The group of nobles was also used to living a luxurious and peaceful life. They ate, drank, and played and didn't want to fight at all. If war broke out, it would hurt their interests. Who would be willing to fight? The ninth prince was so angry that he laughed. The war hadn't even started and the people below were already thinking about how to sue for peace. Were they still the people of the northern borderline? Sue for peace. Why don't you send someone to wag his tail at Lu Shi and beg for mercy? The ninth prince's temper flared up and he directly scolded that person. Before the horse plague in the northern borderline, they were still sharpening their swords and preparing to send troops to the central plains. It had only been a few years and a group of officials wanted to negotiate for peace without even fighting a war. The official was scolded by the ninth prince and his old face turned green and black. Although he didn't flare up in court, he remembered it and directly hated the ninth prince. Acting king, in my opinion, this war can't be avoided. If we talk about peace now, it will undoubtedly help the others and diminish our own prestige. An old northern borderline official stepped out and said, the most important thing now is to reorganize the troops and prepare to face the enemy. This old official said a bunch of nonsense, but it was better than talking about peace. The ninth prince also wanted to take this opportunity to take back the military power of the various tribes. The official's words were exactly what he wanted. That makes sense. The ninth prince said, there is a strong enemy outside. The entire northern borderline should work together to fight against the enemy. A few of his brothers ran to the fief and gathered troops. It was obvious that they wanted to pull the acting king down from his throne. How could the ninth prince let them do as they wished? He might as well take back the military power in their hands while they were at war. Without the military power, no matter how capable his brothers were, they wouldn't be able to cause much trouble. The ninth prince's abacus was very loud. He knew that the northern borderline royal court was short of finances, but a lack of money was one thing and a war was another. The cavalry's strength was greatly reduced, but the infantry's strength was still there. The three tribes of the northern borderline could fight on and off horses. The warriors fought fiercely, tyrannical and fearless. From the ninth prince's point of view, Jiang Pengji's decision to attack the northern borderline was akin to shooting herself in the foot. The northern borderline was not even afraid of Dongqing, so why would they be afraid of a small feudal vassal of Dongqing? Hitting a rock with an egg was extremely foolish. The ninth prince's plan was brilliant, but little did he know that the actual execution of this plan was fraught with difficulties. He knew that he could use this opportunity to take back his military power, but how could his brother not know what he was planning? Don't think that he's the only smart person in the world. Once he gave up his military power, he would be like a tiger without its teeth and claws. In the future, his life and death would be up to the hunter's whims. Handing over the military power would mean death, but not handing over the military power would make the ninth prince afraid. Only a fool would obey orders. After weighing the pros and cons, these princes of the northern borderline all chose to pretend to be deaf and dumb. As the acting king, the ninth prince's first order was met with all kinds of prevarications, with little effect. He was so angry that his chest hurt. Bastard! I am the king of the northern kingdom, how dare they disobey my order? The ninth prince gritted his teeth in anger. If he had known this would happen, he would have asked Sun Wen to kill them. Thinking of Sun Wen, the ninth prince's heart ached even more. The ninth prince heaved a long sigh and muttered, "If Zidao was still here, why would I need to suffer their wrath?" Sun Wen was already deified in the ninth prince's heart, becoming a cinnabar mole that could not be erased. On the second day of the second month, the dragon raised its head. This year was destined to be an extraordinary one. Jiang Pengji, who had been dormant for years, finally revealed her fangs. Seeing that the spring plowing season was approaching, the mobilization of troops at the border of the northern borderline and Chongzhou became more frequent. Occasionally, small-scale conflicts would break out. The atmosphere of war became more intense, as if a storm was brewing. In the same year, the Meng family of Zhangzhou and Huang Song officially broke off. The conflict between the Su and Pei brothers reached its climax. Zhangzhou's Yang Tao completely gained a foothold. The land of Dongqing was swallowed alive by a giant beast named War. It was swallowed into its stomach. Lu Shi and the northern borderline, Su Pei and Su Fei, Huang Song and the Meng family of Zhangzhou, these few families have stirred up the whole of Dongqing. Yang Tao frowned. Every family was at war, which meant that their development would temporarily stop. This was a good opportunity for him to grow stronger. If he waited for them to decide the winner, Yang Tao would only have Zhangzhou. He might be targeted by a few families. Only by strengthening himself could he survive in this chaotic world. But, where else in Dongqing could he fight? Yang Tao scratched his head, troubled. Yan Lin said, "The world is big, Dongqing is not the only country." Yang Tao was dumbfounded. Huh? Yan Lin smiled faintly. Do you want to compete with Lu Shi and the others? Yang Tao said bluntly, when the gods fight, what's the use of mortals? Even if we want to compete, now is not the time. His foundation was not as stable as Jiang Pengji and the others. If he snatched food from their mouths, it would be a strenuous and unrewarding task. Yan Lin looked down and said coldly, the fake emperor escaped into Nanxing with his defeated army. This is a good excuse for us to attack. Dongqing's territory had already been occupied by a few gods, but other countries had not, especially Nanxing. The fake emperor, Prince Changshu, had escaped to Nanxing. Yang Tao could use this excuse to attack Nanxing's territory. Yan Lin said, the feudal lords of Dongqing have more or less established themselves. It's hard to shake them now. Why don't you find another way out, my lord? From my point of view, Nanxing is a good choice. After the four factions of Nanman attacked Nanxing, the feudal lords of Nanxing rose in revolt. Unfortunately, the four factions of Nanman were strong and powerful. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. Nanxing didn't have a chance to rest and recuperate. Why don't you take this opportunity to enter Nanxing and focus on developing? When your power grows and you have enough power, it won't be too late to turn around and counterattack. What do you think, my lord? The cake of Dongqing was almost divided up. If Yang Tao wanted to get involved, he would have to fight with the feudal lords. It was too difficult. Instead of that, he might as well settle for another cake. If it was during peaceful times, how could he just casually send troops into another country's territory? He dared to try. Things were different now. Nanxing had been destroyed. All kinds of fake governments were growing crazily like chives. No one was legitimate. No one would say anything if Yang Tao wanted to interfere. Yang Tao had a good reason to do so. The fake emperor, Prince Changsho, was his enemy. Couldn't he go after his enemy across borders? Alright, then I'll listen to Xiaoyang. Yang Tao could fight, but he couldn't use his brain. Anyway, he had Yan Lin, his external brain. It was not his turn to think about such things. After more than a month, the spring plowing was coming to an end. Jiang Pengji had completed the final mobilization of the troops. Is the second prince of the northern borderline still alive? Jiang Pengji turned her head and asked. Qiguan Rang waved his feather fan lightly. He's still alive. Why did you suddenly mention him? Chapter 970. Seeing the second prince of the northern borderline again after a few months, the audience in the streaming room couldn't recognize what this thing was. Meow's wish, streamer, I haven't eaten yet. What is this thing? Love's death soul, is he abusing a captive? Mischievous Nuanyuan, he seems to be the second prince of the northern borderline. Is this poor little thing still alive? They thought that the second prince was dead after falling into Jiang Pengji's hands. They didn't expect him to be so tenacious. Of course, the second prince could survive until now thanks to the care of several doctors day and night. Otherwise, he would have died a long time ago. The second prince didn't have a good life. Every day was torture. His legs were crippled, and his tongue was cut off. What was the point of living? He knew there was no point in living, but he couldn't muster the courage to commit suicide. It was better to live a bad life than to die a good death. Wasn't there a saying in the Han family of the Central Plains? After suffering one blow after another, the second prince was terrified. His arrogance had been wiped clean. He would rather eat dregs of pig's feed than die. As long as he was alive, maybe he could kill Lu Shi after the northern borderline became strong. Then he could regain his original noble identity. This thought supported the second prince to live. He forced himself to live again and again. Now he had no courage to commit suicide. He had lost the concept of time. He only knew that he was living well. Suddenly, someone took him out of the cage and washed him. They scrubbed him with bath mud, changed him into clean clothes, and washed his hair full of lice. He felt refreshed. Ah. Ah. The second prince's tongue was cut off. He couldn't speak. He could only make meaningless sounds. The closest cage held the second prince's most trusted advisor. His situation was much better than the second prince's. He could speak and listen. Seeing a group of people about to take the second prince away, the advisor clung to the pillar of the cage and hurriedly asked. Where are you taking him? He thought he would be put in an important position after being captured, but Jiang Pengji looked down on him. Although she didn't say to kill him, she didn't say to let him go either. He could only waste his time in the cage. Other than the lack of freedom, he was treated well. Where? The warden glanced at the advisor and sneered, today is an auspicious day. Naturally, we will send him on his way. The second prince's hearing was fine. When he heard this, he immediately struggled violently. He got on all fours and tried to crawl away. Several jailers tied him up mercilessly. All the foreign tribes of the northern borderline should die. These prison guards were all natives of Chongzhou. They were the most vocal victims of the northern borderline's invasion of Dongqing. How could they forget the blood feud of hundreds of thousands of people at the border of Chongzhou? No matter how reluctant the second prince was, he could not resist the power of the crowd. Soon, he was thrown in front of Jiang Pengji. I've said it before, you're the most suitable sacrifice for the flag. Jiang Pengji glanced at the second prince coldly and sneered. Today, she was dressed in a dignified imperial robe with 9 chapters. She was dressed in black and crimson, with coral hanging down from her head. She had a jade ornament and a sword, which was tied to her knees. Amateurs enjoy the show, while experts appreciate the artistry. Not to mention anything else, just from her clothes, one could see her ambition. Lo Siji Lianmeng, imperial robe with 9 chapters. It's a high-class imperial robe that only nobles can wear. My streamer, you're amazing. The ancient times were not modern times. Not all clothes could be worn. If one wore the wrong clothes, he or she would be killed. The imperial robe symbolized social status. Only the emperor, dukes, marquises, earls, sons, men, orphans, ministers, and doctors had the right to wear it. Different people wore different imperial robes. They were roughly divided into 6 styles, which was why they were called the 6 crowns. Although Jiang Pengji was one of the feudal lords of Dongqing, the royal family of Dongqing was not completely finished. Her social status was limited to magistrate of Wanzhou. Her other identities were not recognized by the court. However, regardless of whether the court recognized it or not, Jiang Pengji would not give a damn about them. In the past, the flag was mostly sacrificed with pigs, cows, and sheep. Their blood was splashed on the ground as a sacrifice to the heavens to seek martial arts fate. If it was a war, captives or enemy generals' heads were often used as sacrifices. To boost morale, kill one to warn others. Now that Jiang Pengji was going to send troops to the northern borderline, what sacrifice could be more motivating than the second prince of the northern borderline? A long speech had to be made before the flag was sacrificed. Jiang Pengji used Wei Si's draft. Every word wept with blood. He described the cruelty of the foreign tribes in the northern borderline and the suffering of the people of Chongzhou. It evoked the anger and hatred of the soldiers. She changed the topic and ordered people to bring the sacrifice to the altar. At that moment, the hatred and morale of the soldiers had reached its peak. The sound of killing shook the heavens. The second prince knelt on the ground, shivering. There were 2 people beside him who were holding his shoulders so that he could not move. Today, this person's life will be used as a sacrifice to the countless souls who died in vain. May the heavens bless us and flatten the northern borderline. Flatten the northern borderline, flatten the northern borderline, flatten the northern borderline. The sound of the waves was louder than the one before it. Tens of thousands of soldiers gathered together and shouted in unison. Their murderous intent pierced through the clouds. Sacrifice to the flag. Jiang Pengji drew the sword from her waist. The snow-white blade shone with a cold light under the sunlight. Seeing that, the second prince was scared out of his wits. He did not care that his legs were crippled and his entire body was tied up. He struggled violently, trying to break free. He yelled in vain. His eyes were red and tears gathered and slid down his cheeks. However, the guards on his left and right were too strong. No matter how he struggled, they did not move an inch. The second prince changed his strategy. He tried to kowtow to Jiang Pengji and beg for mercy. He did not want glory and wealth. He did not want the identity of the second prince of the northern borderline. He only wanted to live on. As long as he could live, he would not pursue the matter of Jiang Pengji sending people to cut off his tongue and break his legs. However, Jiang Pengji had a heart of stone. There was not a trace of compassion or benevolence in her eyes. Her right hand that was holding the sword was steady. You are the first to repay the debt of the northern borderline. After saying that, she raised her hand and waved the sword in front of the desperate eyes of the second prince. A head with its eyes wide open rolled off his neck. A strong gush of blood spurted out from the wound. It stained Jiang Pengji's royal robe and the battle flag nearby. The second prince's head rolled twice. When it stopped, his cheek was facing Jiang Pengji. His eyes were wide open. Flatten the northern borderline, flatten the northern borderline, flatten the northern borderline. The second prince's body collapsed. His head was placed on a plate and raised high. The soldiers below him roared louder and louder. Jiang Pengji raised her sword high. Her voice was not soft, but it was exceptionally firm. Flatten the northern borderline. Emotions were contagious. In such an atmosphere, even a calm and composed person would become excited and high-spirited. After the sacrifice to the flag, it was time to go on stage and select the generals. Sun Wen, who was below, sighed with emotion. I always feel that I've followed an extraordinary lord. Wei Ci, who was beside him, heard it. The corners of his lips curled into a warm smile. Yes. Chapter 971. If the Central Plains were the battlefield, Jiang Pengji could defend the city walls and avoid facing the cavalry head-on. She could use other methods to attack the north borderline. But now, the northern border was the main battlefield. With such a wide terrain, it was a paradise for cavalry to come and go as they pleased. If the northern borderline wanted to do this, there was a very important premise: they have so many cavalrymen. Ever since the horse plague a few years ago, the northern borderline's cavalry had suffered a great blow and were unable to recover. The royal court of the northern borderline colluded with the Meng family of Zhangzhou to purchase mares at a high price, which greatly increased the production of foals. However, it also took time to domesticate the foals. Jiang Pengji took advantage of the time difference. She chose the most awkward time for the northern borderline to send her troops, forcing the northern borderline to fight in a sorry state. At that moment it was unknown how many nobles of the northern borderline were cursing Jiang Pengji's ancestors. Of all the times to start the battle, they had to choose this timing. Otherwise, they could wait for the northern borderline to recover more than half of its vitality. At that time, they could fight openly. If they had done it earlier, the northern borderline would not have suffered such a big loss. The money saved from the deal with the Mengs could have been invested in the expansion of the army. Now, the vitality of the northern borderline had not been restored in time, and the money that had been invested was also wasted. Lu Shi has gone too far. The 9th prince was so angry that he tore up the secret report. Damn it, she actually dared to hit him. But that woman actually used their 2nd prince as a sacrifice. When had the northern borderline suffered such grievances? When had he ever been slapped in the face like this? Acting king, I am willing to lead the army to repel that traitor Lu. Not only was Wu Liba the wise man of the northern borderline, but he was also one of the few wise generals of the northern borderline. He was experienced in commanding and was fully qualified to lead an army. However, the 9th prince was wary of the master-disciple relationship between Wu Liba and the 3rd prince. He did not dare to relinquish his military power and chose another person to be the commander-in-chief with Wu Liba as his assistant. Because the king of the northern borderline suffered a stroke and was paralyzed, he was unable to handle the court affairs. The 9th prince succeeded as the acting king and temporarily took over the duties of the king of the northern borderline. Whether or not Wu Liba could become the commander-in-chief still required the approval of the 9th prince. The result did not need to be said. Wu Liba had volunteered and received this result. Naturally, he was indignant. Although he was indignant, now was not the time to be calculative about personal gains and losses. The most important thing at the moment was to repel the invading thief Lu. Even so, when Wu Liba found out who the commander-in-chief of the 3 armies was, he was so angry that his eyes turned red. The commander was none other than Wu Liba's political enemy, Herentia, who had assisted the 9th prince in becoming the acting king. When enemies meet, their eyes turn red. Herentia and Wu Liba were definitely incompatible like fire and water. It would already be good if they did not drag each other down. How could he expect them to advance together? The 9th prince did not notice the exchange of glances between Herentia and Wu Liba, and suddenly threw out a bomb. I intend to personally lead the army to boost the morale of the 3 armies. Personally lead the army? **T, Herentia and Wu Liba cursed in their hearts in unison. Was this bastard trying to stir up trouble? Don't you know what it means to be out in the field and not to obey the sovereign's orders? Putting everything else aside, the 9th prince was the acting king. After he personally led the army into battle, would the army obey the commander-in-chief or him? The 9th prince wasn't even as good as the 2nd prince, let alone leading troops to war. At least the 2nd prince had the experience of conquering tribes, but the 9th prince knew nothing at all. Taking 10,000 steps back, the 9th prince arrived at the front line and didn't do anything. He generously handed over the military power to the commander-in-chief and didn't interfere in the war. That wouldn't do either. The swords on the battlefield had no eyes. If the ninth prince was caught by the enemy, would he be helping or causing trouble? For the first time, Wu Liba and Herentia reached a consensus to stop the ninth prince. Acting king, personally leading the army concerns the fate of the nation. Please think twice before acting. If they could win, it wouldn't be a problem. If they lost, the acting king would be captured or killed. Regardless of whether he was dead or alive, it would be a huge blow to the morale of the northern borderline. No matter how one looked at it, the current northern borderline had not reached the point where the acting king needed to personally lead the army. This matter could be avoided if possible. The two of them didn't know that the ninth prince wanted to lead the army personally because he had a guilty conscience. If all the troops were transferred to the front line, he would be in charge of the imperial court. This meant that the number of troops protecting him would be greatly reduced. If his brothers joined forces to launch a sneak attack on the imperial court, wouldn't he be dead for sure? Rather than that, he might as well follow to the front line. On one hand, he could boost the morale of the three armies. On the other hand, he could control the various generals and reduce the number of collusions and disagreements in the entire army. If he could defeat Lu Shi, he might be able to be promoted from acting king to a true king. The first time he led the army personally, he achieved a great victory. What did this mean? It meant that he was the king of the northern borderline chosen by the great god of the grasslands, the Lord of Destiny. Apart from Herentia and Wu Liba, the other ministers suggested one after another. Their intentions were similar. Stay in the imperial court and don't run around. Leave the war to the adults. You'd better dig in the mud obediently. The ninth prince was furious when he heard this. He insisted on leading the army personally. No one could persuade him otherwise. The arm could not twist the thigh. The ninth prince insisted on leading the army personally. Wu Liba and Herentia could only agree with a gloomy face. Anyway, the king had more than one son. Without the ninth prince, there was still a string of princes waiting to take the throne. The northern borderline was vast. Most of it was flat grasslands, gobi, glaciers, swamps, and deserts. It seemed quiet, but it was actually full of danger. After leaving the checkpoint at the border of the northern borderline and Dongqing, the further north they went, the flatter the terrain and the wider the field of vision. Although Sun Wen had not stayed in the northern borderline for a long time, he had done his homework. It was as if he had lived in the northern borderline for decades. Jiang Pengji listened to his suggestions carefully. She considered whether to adopt or improve them. The further we go, the more open the terrain will be. The mountains will be flat. This place is very suitable for the cavalry to assemble and charge. According to the news from the scouts, they have already set up camp by the Yi River. This place is rich in water and the terrain is open. It's not easy to launch a sneak attack. Jiang Pengji led the vanguard battalion and the cavalry to their destination. The rest of the troops and logistics would need another day to arrive. Yi River? Jiang Pengji stared at the river on the map in a daze. The northern borderline has set up camp by the water? Sun Wen was puzzled. He said, according to the scouts, that is indeed the case. Setting up a camp was also very particular. The choice of the location of the camp and the distribution of the camp was a skill. Not only did they have to consider the size and position of each camp to achieve the purpose of resisting the enemy's sneak attack, but they also had to consider how to quickly transmit information and ensure that the news on the battlefield was transmitted quickly. Apart from that, there had to be a clean water source near the camp. Jiang Pengji frowned. She asked Sun Wen, Zidao, do you know the length and width of the Yi River and its source? Sun Wen was a smart man. Jiang Pengji didn't have to ask too clearly for him to guess part of it. Feng Zhen, who was beside her, had a lot of ideas. He also figured it out. My lord, do you mean to cut off their water source? I'm afraid that won't work. They know the distribution of water in the northern borderline better than we do. If we cut off this river, they can still choose another one. We can't defend against it. The water source in the northern borderline wasn't abundant, but it wasn't the time of extreme water shortage. It was just the beginning of spring. As spring and summer approached, the glaciers upstream would melt, and the river would become more abundant. Sun Wen frowned. Could it be poisoning? Chapter 972. Wen Shiguan Rang and Wei Ci were rushing over with the main force. At this moment, the two of them were not in the tent. Sun Wen frowned when he heard this. If it wasn't poisoning or cutting off the water, then, my lord, you mean, the flood? What was a flood? The live stream viewers gave a clearer answer. Gui Kai Guo Feng Shao, Ling Sun. It's more common here in the Yellow River. Generally, it was because the lower section of the river was frozen or the ice dam formed by the accumulation of ice, causing the river to be blocked and causing the river to rise. If it was light, it would cause the river to flood, but if it was heavy, it would cause the dam to break and cause a disaster. Cafeteria Daffin Auntie, I realize that our streamer is becoming more and more witty. I feel like the retarded Beijiang is going to die soon. Dajiang marries me. No, if it's a man-made flood, the host is now downstream. Is she going to drown herself? How was that possible? Jiang Pengji wanted to crush her opponent to death, not dig a hole to bury herself. Now that the weather is so cold, it will take at least a month for the snow to melt. The Yi River was wide and long, with a large difference in height between the upper and lower reaches. It flowed through all the major tribes in the northern borderland. If we can create a man-made ice flood and prevent the Yi River from flooding, that would be a great idea. The northern borderline was a nomadic people. They lived by water, and wherever there was a water source and abundant grass, they would go there. In other words, if the Yi River burst its dike, the northern borderline tribes near the Yi River would suffer. At this time, a spectator in the live stream remembered a detail and quickly asked in the live stream. Xia Xingchen, streamer, I've carefully looked at the map of the north borderline and Dongqing. It seems that the water of the Yong River will flow into the territory of Dongqing, right? If the upstream Yi River burst its dike and flooded, would the water flow in Dongqing be affected? It wasn't a problem to flood the northern borderline, but he didn't want to drown his own family. Regarding this problem, Jiang Pengji was not very worried. Dongqing's water veins were crisscrossed and were quite developed. The overflowing water from the Yi River gushed into Dongqing. After many divergences, the impact was not great. Feng Zhen rubbed his chin and said, even so, the three tribes of the north borderline have lived here for a long time. How could they not even know about Ling Sun? The herdsmen of the northern borderline were very dependent on this water source. Their ancestors had been dealing with this river for generations. If the people of Dongqing depended on the heavens to eat, then the people of the north borderline depended on the rivers to eat. Once the river dries up or floods overflow, the tribes living along the river will suffer. If there were any changes in the Yi River, they would definitely be able to detect it immediately. They were far more experienced than them. Sun Wen furrowed his brows and said, Zishir's worries are not without reason. If their intentions were discovered by the enemy one step ahead of them, no matter how powerful the plan was, it would be greatly reduced and would not be able to achieve the desired effect. The reason why he was able to achieve such an unexpected result was because the information on both sides was not on the same level. Feng Zhen looked at the Yi River channel with a thoughtful expression. His eyes narrowed slightly, and there seemed to be a flash of inspiration in them. The Yi River was not the only river in the northern borderline. If they were to occupy the upstream to intercept the water, no matter how stupid they would not stay in the same place. Based on the northern borderline's understanding and rich experience of the Yi River, it was quite possible for them to discover the preemptive opportunity to create a man-made ice flood. Once they lost the initiative, their advantage would turn into a disadvantage. In that case, it would be better to cut off the water upstream to ensure the normal flow of the Black River and store water upstream at the same time. When this idea popped up, Feng Zhen couldn't help but think in that direction. As he thought about it, he simulated the feasibility of it. After a while, Fengzhen said, "There really is a plan." While Jiang Pengji and the others were discussing in the tent, the northern borderline camp was also in a heated debate. After all, the northern borderline was fighting on their home ground. The speed at which they gathered their troops and set up camp was much faster than Jiang Pengji's. The scouts returned with news. Jiang Pengji's army was gathering 20 miles away from the camp. The main force had not arrived yet. Hearing this news, Wu Liba's entire body trembled. He hurriedly stepped forward to speak. The Lu clan has a large number of soldiers and generals. I heard that the soldiers in the tent are all elites who have been meticulously trained. If we allow their 100,000-strong army to gather, they will certainly be a great threat to us. In my opinion, the acting king should give the order. While the Lu clan's army has not arrived, we should attack first and catch them off guard. As long as we successfully defeat their elite vanguard, the morale of the Lu clan's army will be greatly reduced. In ancient wars, morale was one of the key factors that determined the outcome of a war. If morale was high, even eunuchs could chase hens. If morale was low, 3 to 5 strong men could be chased by rookies. As long as they defeated Jiang Pengji's elite vanguard and severely damaged her morale, would the warriors of the northern borderline be afraid of her 100,000 elites? I forgot to mention that during a war, the armies of both sides like to report their numbers. An army of 1,000,000 might only have a little more than 500,000, rounded up to 1,000,000. The northern borderline claimed to have 500,000 men, but in reality, there were only 180,000 of them. Among them, 80,000 of the militia were conscripted at the last minute. The Lu clan had raised the flag of 150,000 men. Judging by one's own strength, perhaps there were only 50,000 or 60,000? Wu Liba's suggestion was more sensible. Although the combat power of the northern borderline's cavalry was less than 30% of its peak, they were not afraid of sneak attacks. Unfortunately, Wu Liba had a political enemy, the commander-in-chief. Harunsha would not agree to his suggestion. Harunsha suggested that the acting king defend and not fight. They should wait for the Lu clan's troops to weaken and their morale to drop before waiting for an opportunity to counterattack. After all, the acting king was personally leading the army. If they attacked rashly and the king's safety was threatened, who would bear the responsibility? How could they switch from defense to offense? Wu Liba's face was ashen. He cursed Harunsha in his heart. Defend my ass. Lu Shi's vanguard only had about 20,000 to 30,000 men. How could they be afraid with such a small number of people? Go home and find your mother to drink milk. Wu Liba was so angry that he wanted to flip the table. However, he did not have the final say in the camp, much less Harunsha. It was the acting king who had the final say. Because the 9th prince was afraid of death, he wanted to lead the army personally to prevent his brothers from ambushing him while the imperial court was empty. However, he was still afraid of death when he reached the army camp. He was afraid that the general in charge of the military would lead the troops to rebel against him. In order to restrict everyone's military power, he directly gave a stupid order: any military advance or retreat must be reported to the higher-ups, and must not act arbitrarily. What did this mean? In layman's terms, it was, all matters of war, no matter how big or small, had to be told to him and let him make the decision. You guys can't make the decision yourselves. F***ck. F***ck. Hearing this order, Harunsha and Wu Liba felt their balls ache. Did they not know what fleeting opportunities meant? Everything had to be done with the acting king's approval. Lu Shi had already led his troops to attack the Yellow Dragon and stab the imperial court. The acting king did not care what they thought. The world was big, but his own safety was the most important. What Harunsha said made sense. He was conservative and steady, but Wu Liba's suggestion was also very tempting. The acting king had just taken office and his prestige was not stable. He urgently needed a victory to establish his prestige, no matter how big or small. This matter, let me think about it. I will give you an answer in 2 hours at the earliest. Wu Liba, 2 hours. Hurry my ass. Chapter 973. The Yi River was one of the top rivers in the northern borderland. The width of the Yi River near the camp of the northern frontier was more than 5 miles, which was about 2,500 meters. Jiang Pengji's army was stationed on the east bank of Yi River, while the army of the northern borderline was stationed on the west bank. The two armies faced each other across the river. Wu Liba suggested that the acting king take advantage of the time when Jiang Pengji's vanguard battalion had just arrived and had yet to converge with the main army to forcefully cross the river and launch a sneak attack. Herentia, however, made a completely opposite suggestion. He hoped to hold their ground and not fight, waiting for the enemy's morale to weaken before fighting again. The former made sense and poked the acting king's itch, but the latter was more reliable. The acting king hesitated for a moment. There's no point in scheming with him. Wu Liba left the commander's tent. He was so angry that his eyes turned black and he almost vomited blood. Why were the sons of the ambitious king of the northern borderline so afraid of death? Herenza's back foot came out. He laughed coldly. Congratulations in advance, General Wu Liba. I'm afraid that the king will accept your suggestion. Wu Liba secretly clenched his fists, resisting the urge to punch Herentia's face. This old fellow's words were too sarcastic. Traitor Lu is no ordinary person. He has countless advisors around him. If I miss this opportunity, 2 hours later, the acting king will agree to switch from defense to offense. I'm afraid that traitor Lu has already prepared a countermeasure. The battlefield was ever-changing. If he missed this opportunity, he might lose. Jiang Pengji led the vanguard battalion to the east bank of the Yi River. There were only slightly more than 30,000 troops, so they could be completely annihilated. The 30,000-strong vanguard army had experienced a long journey and had exhausted a lot of their physical strength. This was the moment when their combat power was at its weakest. If they had accepted his suggestion earlier, they might have been able to cross the river and launch a sneak attack under the cover of the morning mist. Now? Wait another 2 hours? Even if the acting king agreed, it would still take 2 hours for the troops to cross the river. If the efficiency was lower, it might even take 4 hours. By that time, the mist on the surface of the river would have dispersed. Would they be able to cross the river and launch a sneak attack? This was like sending a moving human target to the enemy. They could sit down and have a picnic, eat breakfast, and take a nap. While they were at it, they could get into formation to face the enemy. Sneak attack. Wu Liba resisted the urge to vomit blood. *CK, I really can't carry these stupid teammates. Even if he was fully equipped, he would not be able to carry it. When he said 2 hours, he meant 2 hours, not a second more or less. The acting king's choice dilemma flared up. After wasting 2 hours, he finally made up his mind to follow Wu Liba's suggestion and cross the river to launch a sneak attack. With regards to this, Wu Liba could only chuckle in response. On the surface he chuckled, but on the inside he was cursing. If Wu Liba's opponent was not Jiang Pengji but someone else, he might still be able to make it. Unfortunately, Wu Liba's opponent was Jiang Pengji. The strategists under Jiang Pengji were all shrewd. Looking around, he realized that he was surrounded by useless teammates. Looking at his opponents, they were all gods. We've already missed the golden opportunity. Let's wait for nightfall. Wu Liba swallowed the thick phlegm that was rolling down his throat. He had no choice but to restrain himself. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would grab the acting king's shoulder and spit this thick phlegm on the other party's face. The mist on the surface of the river has already dispersed. Sneak attacks won't be of much use. On the east bank of the Yi River, in the Lu family's camp, Jiang Pengji and a few strategists spread out cloth on the banks of the Yishui River for a picnic. Feng Zhen was still happily drinking wine. Zai Dao has foresight. They really didn't cross the river for a sneak attack. At first, he saw traces of troop movements in the enemy's main camp. Then, it became quiet again. It was obvious that they had given up on crossing the river for a sneak attack. TSK, it made him nervous for a while. Sun Wen looked at the scene in front of him. He resisted the twitching of his eyebrows and said expressionlessly, if Wu Liba was the commander-in-chief and the acting king of the northern borderline didn't personally lead the army into battle, or if he chose to delegate power to Wu Liba, I'm afraid that the army of the northern borderline would have crossed the river more than 2 hours ago. If that was the case, why would they still be eating breakfast by the river? But the reality is that the acting king of the northern borderline is personally leading the army into battle, and the commander-in-chief is Wu Liba's political enemy. I can't take it anymore, I'm laughing so hard my stomach hurts. Feng Zhen laughed and almost choked on the wine. He had no choice but to laugh. Wu Liba, the wise man of the northern borderline, was too pitiful. If Wu Liba could seize the opportunity to cross the river and launch a sneak attack, even if the troops were prepared, they might be caught unprepared. They might not be completely annihilated, but it was inevitable that they would suffer some losses. Don't think that suffering a small loss was nothing. If the main forces of the two armies suffered a small loss before the battle began, the morale of the army would drop by a large margin. Sun Wen had been a multifaceted spy in the northern borderline. He had thoroughly studied the temperaments of the main characters. No matter how powerful Wu Liba was, he was bound to be tricked by a group of arrogant and stupid teammates who would only hold him back. Don't be arrogant in victory, don't be discouraged in defeat. Moreover, we haven't won yet. It's not time for us to be arrogant. Jiang Pengji warned Feng Zhen to prevent him from acting recklessly. She said calmly, we missed this opportunity today, but there's another one tonight. Be careful. If they still didn't launch a sneak attack at night, Not to mention Feng Zhen, she would also pity Wu Liba. Jiang Pengji smiled and squinted her eyes. She said, oh right, how are things going on Zixiao's side? Feng Zhen restrained the wanton look on his face, and a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. Rest assured, my lord. The timing is just right, if wisdom is not enough, then we'll conquer it with force, Jiang Pengji said. Tonight, we'll teach the northern borderline how to fight a war. If wisdom was not enough, then we'll conquer it with force? Teach the northern borderline how to fight a war? In terms of arrogance, there was probably no one more arrogant than this lord. Sun Wen thought about it silently. Jiang Pengji didn't like to waste time in battles. Her biggest characteristic was her rapid pace. If the quality of the soldiers she led was average, an overly fast pace would easily cause the order of the battle to be disjointed, and they would become a burden instead. It was different now. Her soldiers had been painstakingly trained for several years. Apart from training every day, they were the elites of the elites. In the words of the audience in the streaming room, even in the Hua Nation's army, their average standard was above average. To Jiang Pengji, they were still a group of rookies, but to this era, they were mighty troops that would shock the world. They had kept a low profile, bided their time, and trained their horses and soldiers for several years, just waiting for today's battle. Jiang Pengji led 30,000 vanguards to the battlefield. According to her usual thinking, the rest of the main force should only arrive in 3 or 4 days. Most of the vanguard battalion was cavalry. They were fast and mobile. Most of the main force was infantry and logistics, so their speed was naturally slow. Little did they know that Jiang Pengji wasn't someone who played her cards according to logic. At this moment, the surface of Yishui Lake was dark. A thin fog gradually rose, and both sides of the lake were shrouded in the dark night. It was the time when people were sound asleep and their alertness was at its lowest. Jiang Pengji sat in the main tent with her eyes closed. She seemed to be taking a nap. The audience in the streaming room was bored and sent bullet screens, imagining the future. Changxing Luoyue, if the streamer becomes the Empress who unifies the world in the end, will today's battle be recorded in the history books? Kakara, it definitely will. This is Yishui in the northern borderline. Maybe it will be the famous Battle of Yishui? Xiaoshuo Wushuang, Battle of Yishui? No, isn't this name too perfunctory? The audience chatted on and off. The voice of Li Yun, the captain of the vanguard battalion, sounded from outside the tent. Chapter 974. 1. Jiang Pengji, who was resting with her eyes closed, suddenly opened her eyes when she heard the commotion. Her dark eyes flashed with a cold light. As she got up, she picked up the long sword on her knees with her right hand and carried it on her shoulder. Han Mei, let's go. She opened the tent flap and saw a young general in armor standing to the side. His mature face had lost its childish look and was full of masculinity. Jiang Pengji was also wearing armor and looked like she was going to the battlefield to kill the enemy. The strategists beside her had already given up on treating her. No matter how they persuaded her, their lord was not willing to be a quiet princess in the main tent of the Central Army. The way she carried a horse-slaying sword and fought bravely against the enemy made even the chief commander, Fu Wang, fearful. They were also in despair. Others hoped that their lord could do more, but they only hoped that their lord could be more vigilant. The Yi River has been foggy for 15 minutes. Even if we light a fire, we won't be able to see clearly from 300 steps away. Li Yun saw Jiang Pengji walk out of the main tent and hurriedly followed. He said as he walked, the two strategists feel that the time is ripe. In less than an hour, the enemy will surely disembark. Only 3 days had passed since the first day of the lunar calendar. There was only a small crescent moon in the sky. The moonlight was dim and gloomy. Because of the weather, dark clouds covered the sky. The few rays of moonlight were also obscured. The visibility on the ground was very low. In Wu Liba's view, God was also helping him. The opportunity did not come again. He could not let go of such a great opportunity. Don't be careless. Wu Liba is a rare wise general in the northern borderline. He is very experienced. Whether it is you or the gentleman, the path you have taken has been too smooth compared to others. Precisely because of this, you should always be vigilant. Jiang Pengji trusted her strategists, but she would not blindly trust them. Compared to Wu Liba, who had rich experience in war, whether it was the late bloomer Sun Wen or the crafty Feng Zhen, they were no match for Wu Liba in terms of experience. Wu Liba had suffered at Jiang Pengji's hands before. The night attack on the shore this time would not be easy to deal with. Li Yun looked like he had learned something. His little tail that had just been raised drooped down obediently. We know that it is highly likely that Wu Liba will cross the river tonight and launch a sneak attack. However, we do not know when he will arrive or from which direction. Now, we can only deal with the changes by not changing, instructing the vanguard camp to be on their toes and not slack off at all. Jiang Pengji met up with Feng Zhen and the others. When she arrived, Feng Zhen and Jiang Nongqin, the commandant of the female battalion, were discussing in a low voice. Sun Wenze, who was beside them, frowned deeply. "Greetings, my lord." The three of them bowed in unison. No need to be so polite. How are the preparations? Jiang Nongqin said in a low voice, "Your Highness, we're almost ready. We're just waiting for the movement on the river." She was 1 year older than Jiang Pengji's current body. As half of Jiang Pengji's disciple and the first female general under Jiang Pengji's command, the pressure on her was far greater than anyone could imagine. In the few years that Jiang Pengji had been conserving her energy, Jiang Nongqin had also been working hard to enrich herself. She studied military books and practiced diligently. In the past 2 years, she had also developed from a simple general to a scholar and a martial artist. As a woman, her reputation in the military camp was second only to Fu Wang and Meng Hun. She was on par with Li Yun and slightly better than Dian Yan. Jiang Nongqin's contributions could not go unnoticed for the female battalion to be able to develop a scale of 20,000 combat elites and 4,000 medical soldiers. Jiang Pengji looked at the pitch-black surface of the river with a grave expression. Although they had made sufficient preparations, the vanguard battalion only had 30,000 troops. Even if they were all elites, they could not withstand the large number of enemies. I'm afraid it will be a tough battle tonight. No matter what, we have to hold on for a few days, rest assured, my lord. I will definitely fight to the end. A woman's voice was either as gentle as water or as clear as a silver bell. Jiang Nongqin's voice was like a blood-stained knife. Every word was filled with murderous intent. Although she did not have a stocky build, when she stood there, she looked like a sharp spear. After half an hour, the fog on the surface of the river became thicker. It's here. The female soldiers of the vanguard battalion sent back news that a large number of fireflies had appeared on the surface of the river and were approaching the east bank. As time passed, the number of fireflies increased. Through the thick fog, these moving fireflies could be seen from far to near, from small to large, like fireflies. In the dark night, it looked very horrifying. Jiang Nongqin's expression was solemn. She seemed to have thought of something. She said to Sun Wen, military advisor's son, I'm afraid it's a trap. Sun Wen smiled and said, Captain Jiang, you're right. It's indeed a trap. It was obviously a sneak attack. Why did he light a torch in the thin fog? Was he trying to deceive himself? Wu Liba was an old general with rich combat experience. He was best at seizing the opportunity. His arrangements were even more meticulous and experienced. How could such a person overlook such a huge flaw? Although the fog on the surface of the river is thick, since it's a sneak attack, why did he light a torch? Was he afraid that others would not notice him? I think that Wu Liba did this on purpose. He wanted us to focus our attention on this area. He thought that he would land here and launch a sneak attack. This is the first reason. Sun Wen wore a smile on his face. Even though the fireflies on the surface of the river were approaching the shore, he remained motionless. Secondly, the foreign tribes of the north borderline live by water. A mere river is nothing to them. Even if they did not light a torch and the water surface is no more than 5 miles wide, they would be able to cross the river smoothly. In summary, this should be a deliberate decoy. We must not fall for it. Sun Wen spoke calmly. What he wanted to say was exactly what Jiang Nongqin was thinking. Who would shout before a sneak attack, "Don't hide, I'm coming to attack you"? Even so, ordinary people are still easily fooled. The atmosphere of war could make people tense up and often cause them to overlook certain details. Jiang Nongqin sighed and said, Unfortunately, the river is cold now. If it were summer, Wu Liba might be able to make you suffer a little. Sun Wen looked at Jiang Nongqin in surprise. Please give me some pointers, Captain Jiang. Seeing Sun Wen's reaction, Jiang Nongqin said uneasily, I can't say that I'm giving pointers. I just feel that the foreign tribes of the north borderline know the river like the back of their hands. Their swimming skills should not be weak either. If it were summer, the river would not be so cold. Perhaps people could use the hull of the boat as a cover to cross the river. Although Jiang Nongqin's imagination was wild, it was not impossible. When encountering a meticulous person like Sun Wen, he would definitely think that the appearance of a torch on the boat on the river was a feint by the enemy. Little did he know that the enemy was hiding under the shadow of the boat. If they crossed the river, they would be caught off guard. Lieutenant Jiang, you've taught this old man a lesson. Thank you. Sun Wen bowed with his hands folded in front. He valued Jiang Nongqin even more. Jiang Nongqin was just saying. She was experienced in war and training, but she was still an intern when it came to giving advice. She had IQ and knowledge but lacked actual combat experience. Jiang Pengji asked Sun Wen to help Jiang Nongqin because she wanted Sun Wen to give her some pointers. Seeing that the fireflies on the surface of the river had entered their shooting range, Sun Wen ordered to use a rocket to test the waters. Chapter 975. 1. An empty boat was the right choice. Wu Liba placed a straw doll on the boat and lit a torch, trying to attract the attention of Jiang Pengji's side. If it was someone else, they would most likely be fooled. Even if they did not shoot arrows wildly, they would gather a group of troops and wait by the river bank. As long as Jiang Pengji's main force was deployed there, Wu Liba's goal of creating a diversion would be achieved. However, Wu Liba's opponent was Sun Wen, a late bloomer who had once toyed with the northern borderline's imperial court. Sun Wen was cautious and meticulous. He would fully understand his opponent until he could analyze them thoroughly. As the wise man of the northern borderline, Wu Liba was an important target for Sun Wen's careful analysis. Once the enemy analyzed it thoroughly, no matter how ingenious the plot was, it would only be a joke. The strategy of creating a diversion was a complete failure. The messenger delivered a message. The enemy's boat has docked. We've checked. There are only straw dolls and a small soldier manning the helm on the boat. Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue and said to Liyun, "It's our turn next. Han Mei, let's go." Wu Liba used an unmanned boat to attract attention. He would definitely sneak ashore and launch a sneak attack. No matter when he launched a sneak attack, his target would be the main camp. Instead of playing hide and seek with them, it would be better to stay where they were and defend the main camp's defense line. They would wait for the enemy to exhaust themselves. Liyun clenched the silver spear in his hands tightly. He looked cold on the surface, but his heart was surging with excitement. He was not a bloodthirsty and warlike person, but he was unwilling to remain calm. Now that the world was in chaos, only by following his lord to quell the chaos could his family and lover live in peace. His lord had muttered something before, and Liyun felt that it was quite reasonable. The so-called peaceful life was just someone carrying the burden for you. As the head of the family, Liyun was a son, a husband, and a father. He was willing to bear the burden for them. Night enveloped the land, and it was pitch black. The night wind of the northern borderline was as cold as a knife. When it hit his face, it hurt. It was as if it could penetrate deep into his bones. As they had just arrived, Jiang Pengji's main camp had not been completed. The outer defense was complete, but the wooden fences were like paper in the eyes of the northern borderline cavalry. They could not withstand a single blow. Most of the tents in the camp had not been set up yet. He could faintly see some figures moving around the perimeter. They should be the patrolling soldiers. Wu Liba had calculated the time and disembarked in batches. He was prepared to devour Jiang Pengji's 30,000 elites in one go. As long as they successfully defeated the Lu family's vanguard troops and dampened their morale, they wouldn't have to worry too much about the main army. Wu Liba had fought in all sorts of battles in his life, but this was his first time fighting against the Central Plains on his home turf. Whistling arrows soared into the sky. Upon hearing the order, the soldiers of the northern borderline launched a swift and violent attack on Jiang Pengji's camp. Wave after wave of fire arrows landed on the camp, instantly setting it ablaze. Wu Li drew his long saber and roared with all his might. Charge! Just as he had expected, the simple defensive measures of the camp could not withstand the ferocious cavalry of the northern borderline. After a wave of attacks, the fence outside had already collapsed and was almost destroyed. Wu Liba had brought 10,000 men with him for this sneak attack, of which 50% were cavalry. According to his initial estimation, the soldiers of Jiang Pengji's camp should be in a state of deep sleep. Even if they reacted, they would be thrown into confusion by the sudden sneak attack. They wouldn't be able to organize an effective defense, let alone attack. Once Jiang Pengji's army lost order due to panic, it would be the best opportunity for the northern borderline to expand and reap the spoils of war. Wu Liba directly rushed toward the reserves of the camp. No matter how elite they were, once they ran out of food, even if they didn't sacrifice many people, they wouldn't be able to raise their morale. However, what happened next was beyond Wu Liba's expectations. Not only did the soldiers who rushed out of the camp not panic, but they all wore heavy armor and held heavy shields and long sabers in their hands. The heavy shields formed a fish-scale formation, forcefully blocking the cavalry's momentum of charging. They cooperated seamlessly with each other. Their hands rose and their sabers fell. The warhorse beneath the warriors neighed and fresh blood gushed out like a pillar of blood. The cavalry of the northern borderline tried to attack with their spears, but the tip of the spear could not penetrate the fish-scale shield. Not only did it not leave any marks, but they were also pierced through by the spear or chopped into two with a long saber because they couldn't stop in time. There were many soldiers, but due to the limitations of their armor and weapons, their speed of movement was not fast. To make up for the disadvantage of mobility, there were often soldiers from other units who cooperated in battle. The cavalry of the northern borderline fell into a chaotic battle. Because of the heavy shields, it was difficult for the warhorses to display their advantage in speed. On the other side, Wu Liba also realized that something was wrong. Their sneak attack failed and they were ambushed by the enemy instead. Wu Liba secretly gritted his teeth. He brandished his saber and killed a few people, then decisively gave the order. Retreat. Since it was a premeditated ambush, it would not be easy for Wu Liba to escape. Not long after, there was a commotion in the rear formation. The enemy must have gone around to the rear to ambush them. Wu Liba's face darkened. The battle cries from both sides never stopped. Although the northern borderline came to ambush them, they did not have the advantage of a sneak attack. There were only about 10,000 of them. Although Jiang Pengji was ambushed, she had already made preparations for battle. 30,000 elites were sharpening their sabers. As soon as the two armies met, the northern borderline was beaten senseless. In a chaotic battle, not only did it require a large number of people, but it also required individual combat and tacit understanding. The soldiers of the northern borderline were physically strong. They were not afraid in a one-on-one fight, but which of the soldiers under Jiang Pengji were not well trained? Not to mention the male soldiers, even the girls in the female battalion all had six-pack abs. As for tacit understanding, there was no need to elaborate. Although Jiang Nongqin was the captain of the female battalion, she could also lead the soldiers of the male battalion. She nimbly controlled the warhorses and led the troops to the rear of the northern borderline for a sneak attack. In the end, she even shouted loudly, "The northern borderline has been defeated. The northern borderline has been defeated. The old man, Wu Liba, is dead." The night was dark. The surroundings were already in a chaotic battle. The northern borderline was in a difficult situation and it was difficult for them to deal with the situation. They could not even care about themselves. How could they receive accurate information? When Jiang Nongqin led the troops to ambush them from the rear and disrupted their formation, she shouted this. Many soldiers of the northern borderline believed her. Their morale plummeted. They turned around and ran. They dared to turn around and run during the chaotic battle. This was not fleeing for their lives. This was sending warmth and heads to the enemy. The turmoil and chaos at the rear spread rapidly to the front like a rolling snowball. When Wu Liba heard the hurried shouts of the soldiers, he was so angry that he almost vomited blood. "Damn it, I'm right in front of you." Seeing that things were not going well, Wu Liba could only withdraw his troops decisively. As he retreated, he stopped the rumors from affecting the morale of the troops and used it to stabilize their position. However, in the chaos of war, the effect of Wu Liba's efforts was limited. The army of more than 10,000 abandoned thousands of corpses and retreated while fighting. They were forced to flee to the banks of the Yi River. Chapter 976. The northern borderline camp was brightly lit. No one was in the mood to sleep. The acting king was anxiously waiting for news of victory. He was in no mood to care about his beautiful wives and concubines, ignoring their resentful gazes. Still no news. He paced back and forth in the main tent, as if he wanted to rub two holes in the animal skin rug on the floor. Reporting to the acting king, "There is no news at the moment," the guard reported respectfully. The acting king was getting more and more anxious. Wu Liba's battle was of great importance. If he could get off to a good start, the pressure on the northern borderline would be greatly reduced. "What time is it now?" After a while, the acting king sat back on his throne gloomily. His heart was beating steadily, but he felt a little flustered. The guard said, reporting to the acting king, "It is now the hour of the 11th hour." Hour of the 11th hour? It's actually so late. The acting king muttered to himself, "It will be dawn in an hour. Why is Wu Liba not back yet?" The guard looked calm on the surface, but in his heart, he despised the acting king. Fighting a war was not like anything else. It was not possible to say when one would return. There must be a limit to one's willfulness. If Wu Liba, who was bathed in blood, knew what the acting king was thinking, he would definitely be furious. The remnants of the northern borderline were forced to the riverbank. There was nowhere to retreat and they were in a hopeless situation. Wu Liba felt a sense of sorrow, but he did not show any negative emotions. He continued to encourage the soldiers to fight to the death with the enemy. If it was any other time, a fight to the death might have been able to explode with shocking combat power. However, the morale of the northern borderline had been continuously thwarted and had fallen to rock bottom. The soldiers pushed and shoved each other, fighting to be the first to climb onto the boats to cross the river. There was no order to them at all. The only thought in their minds was to escape. How could they listen to Wu Liba's commands? They did not listen to commands and did not follow orders. The people squeezed and squeezed together. Not only did not many escape successfully, but they also caused more casualties. Many people climbed onto the boats, but were careless and pulled down by their comrades behind them, falling into the bone-chilling water. Seeing that it was difficult to board the boats, they relied on their good swimming skills and jumped into the water, attempting to swim back to the other side. Wu Liba could only watch helplessly as they collapsed and escaped into the water like dumplings. He could only sigh deeply, his eyes filled with sorrow. "General, don't hesitate. You should board the ship and retreat first." The deputy general had prepared a boat for him. As long as he could cross the river and reach the other side, Wu Liba would be safe. The battle had just begun. If Wu Liba died here or was captured, the morale of the northern borderline would suffer a devastating blow. Wu Liba knew the seriousness of the matter. He endured the pain from his wound and boarded the ship under the protection of a few deputies. "Lieutenant Jiang, the archers are ready." Jiang Nongqin looked coldly at the enemies on the riverbank and said, "Fire." On the battlefield, there was no such thing as stopping at the right time, and there was no such thing as gentlemanly demeanor. It had always been to seize the opportunity to kill the enemy. Jiang Nongqin commanded thousands of archers to line up in 3 rows. They took turns to shoot at the river bank and the water surface. The river was bone-chilling, and most of the soldiers of the northern borderline were injured. Even if they swam to the other side, they were basically half dead. Jiang Nongqin even sent several waves of arrows to them. In an instant, corpses floated to the surface of the river and blood dyed the river red. Report: in the northern borderline camp, the acting king finally received the battle report that he had been waiting for. "Tell me quickly, did General Wu Liba capture the bandit leader of the Lu family alive?" The acting king stared at the messenger's mouth with a burning gaze, hoping to hear the good news that he wanted the most from his mouth. The messenger said with an expression that looked like he was about to cry, "General has lost. Our army has achieved a great victory. Our army has achieved a great victory." What? The smile on the acting king's face froze halfway. He could hardly believe what he had heard. What did he mean by, "General has lost"? Who lost? Which general? The acting king had spent the entire night imagining how Jiang Pengji would suffer a crushing defeat, how Wu Liba would achieve a great victory, and how he would reward her after the victory to satisfy Wu Liba and not shake his rule. He had never expected the messenger to tell him that Wu Liba had lost. How could Wu Liba have lost? He has been fighting for so many years, yet he lost to a woman, Lushi? The acting king roared angrily. He raised his hand and smashed everything that could be smashed. Although he did not like Wu Liba and relied more on Halunsha, Wu Liba was the backbone of the northern borderline. How could he lose? Where is he? Where is Wu Liba? After the acting king Yidong vented his anger by roaring, he finally calmed down and shouted at the messenger. The messenger said, "General Wu Liba has been rescued. He is now being treated by a doctor." The acting king roared angrily, "Get that old man to come see me. He lost to a woman, yet he still has the face to treat his injuries." When the words left his mouth, the guards guarding the main tent and the messenger felt a chill in their hearts. They felt a chill that they had never felt before. No matter what, Wu Liba was the loyal subject of the king of the northern borderline. He had helped the king to conquer the tribes. Even if Wu Liba had not made any contributions to the northern borderline, he had worked hard. The ninth prince was only the acting king. How could he humiliate the old subjects of two dynasties? As time passed, the murderous cries from the shore of the River gradually faded away. As far as the eye could see, there were countless corpses floating on the surface of the water. Fresh blood dyed the surface of the water scarlet. Jiang Nongqin commanded the soldiers to clean up the battlefield. She pulled out those who were still breathing from the pile of corpses and sent them to the wounded barracks. Jiang Pengji raised her hand to wipe away the blood that flowed into the corner of her mouth. She slowly calmed her surging killing intent and breathing. With a clang, she threw the broadsword in her hand to the side. Sun Wen, who had stepped forward, saw it. The blade was covered in blood. Pieces of flesh and internal organs hung on the back of the broadsword. Some of them had dried up and turned black, but other parts were still very fresh. Not only that, but the broadsword was missing a few notches. Many parts of the blade were curled up. It was extremely worn out. It would probably be difficult to use it again. Although he did not see how his lord killed the enemy with his own eyes, judging from the condition of the broadsword, the battle must have been extremely intense. "Did I scare you?" Jiang Pengji loosened the ropes of her armor. She took out 2 handkerchiefs and wiped her face. Thick blood and pieces of internal organs were all over her face. If it was not for Jiang Pengji's armor, Sun Wen would not have believed that the person sitting on the ground with a golden broadsword was actually a woman. This woman was his lord. Not only was his lord very magical, but the women's battalion that he saw just now was also very magical. She could carry a sword and mount a horse to fight. She could clean up the battlefield and be a doctor. Perhaps, this was the saying, like the lord, like the soldiers. "My lord, your words make you seem weak and frail." Sun Wen laughed bitterly. No matter what, he was of the same generation as her grandfather. He was much older than Lu Shi, but now he received such a consolation that sounded like she was coaxing a child. "I'm not saying that you're weak and frail. Scholars are always more delicate. They're not as crude as warriors." As they spoke, Li Yun arrived. "Is your hand injured?" Jiang Pengji could tell that Li Yun's left arm was injured at a glance. It was probably not shallow. Chapter 977. Even if it doesn't affect you, you have to go to the camp to have a look. If the wound is big, get them to stitch it up. Otherwise, when will the wound heal? After that, Jiang Pengji continued, "Coincidentally, you asked someone to take my knife to be sharpened. The blade is curled to an unsightly state." Li Yun glanced at the knife his lord had thrown on the ground. The knife was as heavy as a stone. Apart from his lord, no one else could use it so smoothly. However, every time his lord returned from the battlefield, she would take the knife to the bladesmith to sharpen it and fix the edge of the curled blade. It wasn't that the quality of the knife wasn't good. It was clearly because his lord was too eager to kill. No matter how good the knife was, it was a disposable item in her hands. The army hasn't arrived yet. The thread in the camp isn't enough. Li Yun relied on his good health to recover quickly. He didn't want to compete with the wounded for scarce medical resources. "The thread we brought isn't enough?" Jiang Pengji was surprised. Li Yun laughed. "It's not just our soldiers who are injured. There are also the captives in the north borderline. The consumption is greater than expected." Jiang Pengji said, "If there isn't enough thread, pull out a few more strands of hair. The wound isn't very deep or long. Hair can make do. Although hair was brittle, when 2 or 3 strands were curled together, their tenacity was not low. It would be no problem in an emergency. A few years ago, Jiang Pengji organized a more comprehensive knowledge of emergency care with the help of the audience in the streaming room. Apart from that, she also consulted the doctor in charge of Wanzhou's medical center about the possibility of suturing wounds. Her exact words at that time were, "The human body is like clothes. Torn clothes can be sutured with thread. If the wound is too big, why can't it be sutured with thread?" The doctor was speechless. How could people and clothes be the same? However, Jiang Pengji was the Lord. Their salaries were all paid by her. The medical center they worked in was also funded by her. At first, they didn't dare to use it on humans. The doctors could only experiment on rabbits or other animals. They even asked the embroidery maids for advice on various embroidery techniques. Facts proved that after the wound was sutured, the recovery speed was much faster than without. The chances of pus festering and death were also greatly reduced. The doctors searched for all kinds of threads suitable for suturing wounds. They even taught this surgical technique to the soldiers in the women's camp. Most of the soldiers who died in the war didn't die on the battlefield. They died because their wounds were not treated in time or because their wounds became inflamed and pus. With better medical care and suturing techniques, most of the injured soldiers could survive. Thanks to this, the women's camp became more and more popular. If it weren't for the rule that women could only get married at the age of 25, many male soldiers would have wanted to get married. Keep the goodies within the family. Most of the female soldiers who retired early because of their injuries chose to stay in the army as logisticians. Their marriage partners were either retired male soldiers, or they had their own household registers. They chose a decent captive to start a family and became the head of the family themselves. Regardless of which one it was, he was currently living his life as he wished and was enviable. Hair too? Li Yun was surprised. "All right, then I will make a trip to the casualty barracks later." While they were talking, the sky was already completely bright, and the red clouds on the horizon were like a halo of paint. The live stream viewers stayed up all night. Most of them were so sleepy that they couldn't open their eyes, but when they saw the floating corpses on the surface of the water, they were so shocked that they lost all desire to sleep. Send someone to fish up these corpses and bury them. Otherwise, the corpses will enter the mouths of the fish and prawns and contaminate the river. It will be inconvenient for us to use water. Jiang Pengji ordered someone to retrieve the corpse. They only cleaned up the corpses on their side of the river. They didn't have to bother with the corpses that floated to the other side, lest they got shot full of holes. After the great victory at the Yi River, the morale on Jiang Pengji's side was unprecedentedly high. Because Dongqing had suffered too many losses at the hands of the north borderline, before the war started, everyone was still anxious and fearful. Dongqing had lost at their home ground. Could they win if they ran over to their territory? The facts proved that not only did they win, but they also won by a landslide. Compared to the jubilation on this side, the north borderline camp on the west bank of the Yi River was filled with a heavy and gloomy atmosphere. Wu Liba was a veteran general, but he was fiercely reprimanded by the acting king in public. He had lost all his face. Even Wu Liba's political enemy, Harunsha, could not help but feel a little sad when he saw his nemesis in such a situation. The acting king was brainless, but Harunsha couldn't watch him continue to court death. Wu Liba had lost, but victory and defeat were common in war. He couldn't beat Wu Liba to the bottom of the valley just because of one loss, could he? There were many people in the north borderline who were good at war, but most of them were reckless warriors. There weren't many commanders with brains. If Wu Liba was crippled, the north borderline would be finished. In the past, Harunsha also thought that no matter how good one's brain was, it couldn't be as hard as one's fist. Ever since he witnessed Sun Wen single-handedly toying with the north borderline's imperial court, he had changed his usual insistence. Nothing must happen to Wu Liba. Thinking of this, Harunsha stepped out to speak up for Wu Liba, which caused everyone to look at him suspiciously. Weren't Harunsha and Wu Liba political enemies? When did the two of them bury the hatchet? The acting king was holding back his anger, but Harunsha was his confidant, so he had to show him some respect. He might as well let Wu Liba recuperate and redeem himself after he recovered. When everyone had left, the acting king specially asked Harunsha to stay. Is there no one in the vast north borderline who can replace Wu Liba? This old man, he's really getting old. The acting king asked Harunsha. The more he was in this situation, the more he missed Sun Wen, who had met with misfortune. If Zaidao was here, how could Wu Liba be so arrogant? Harunsha stood silently at the side. He didn't want to offend the other party. When the acting king had vented enough, Harunsha said, Acting king, in my opinion, Lu Shi won unfairly this time. What do you mean? If the two armies were to face each other, our army would definitely return victorious. In my humble opinion, the plan to create a diversion was a very good one. However, Lu Shi has many strategists under his command. Some of them must have seen through General Wu Liba's plan and have taken precautions against it, setting up strict defenses. In other words, it wasn't that Wu Liba lost to Lu Shi, nor was it that the North Borderline soldiers lost to the weaklings of the Han people. They lost because of their strategy. With that said, the acting king felt much better. Then what should we do? He asked. Do we allow one side to cross the river and fight? Even if they were willing, Lu Shi's side wouldn't agree. They were enemies, not comrades. Why would they trust him? Harunsha said, That's not what I meant. It's just that morale is low and we urgently need to reinvigorate it. Without morale, how could they fight a war? Obviously, the acting king's ability to grasp the main point was a little lacking. The acting king said, If Zaidao was still here, I wouldn't have to do this. Harunsha was speechless. F***CK. F***CK. That's F***king enough. Before the acting king could think of a solution, the two of them heard the sound of a bugle horn. Where's the bugle horn? The high-pitched sound of the bugle horn carried a heavy murderous aura. If one listened carefully, there seemed to be the rumbling of drums, as dense as a rainstorm. Chapter 978. At this time, has Lu Shi gone mad? Realizing the source of the war drums, the acting king stood up from his throne. His expression was fierce and ferocious, like an enraged trapped beast. Acting king, this is a good opportunity. Harunsha was also stunned. He did not expect Jiang Pengji to be so bold. After a great victory, she did not rest and build up her strength. Instead, she took the initiative to attack. However, he was calmer than the acting king and quickly thought of the key point. If he could defeat Jiang Pengji head-on and deal a heavy blow to her, it would definitely restore their fallen morale. Thinking of Harunsha's words, the acting king clenched his teeth and tightened his cheeks. I have 500,000 strong troops. If she wants to fight, I will fight. This Lu Shi will not return. Seeing the acting king's ferocious and bloodthirsty smile, Harunsha secretly sighed in his heart. Hopefully, everything will go smoothly. Harunsha was a little regretful. Why did he have to compete with Wu Liba? He could successfully suppress Wu Liba's limelight mostly because of Sun Wen's meticulous planning. Without Sun Wen's help, Harunsha could only rely on himself to stabilize his current position as a powerful official. It could be said that it was difficult for him to move forward. Banners fluttered, drums beat like thunder, and bugles that resounded through the sky floated to the other side of the river. The acting king rode in a luxurious carriage and personally held the fort for the soldiers of the northern borderline. Wu Liba had been reprimanded and locked in a small dark room not long ago. He temporarily lost his military power. The person who took over his position was Wu Liba's deputy. On the east bank of the Yi River, Jiang Pengji's army was solemn and orderly. The troops were in high spirits. Their eyes glowed with golden light. Each one of them was like a straight and high-spirited spear, their spirit soaring to the sky. Who would have thought that this high-spirited army had been fighting fiercely for a night? Disregarding their combat power, just by looking at their spirit and orderly formation, one would know that this army was a rare elite force in the world. The war drums rumbled and shook the surface of the E River. The air lingered with a murderous aura that did not dissipate. The acting king sat in the carriage, breathing rapidly as he looked at the densely packed figures on the other side of the river. His hands involuntarily clenched the armrests. He had previously mocked the idiom of the Han people. The phrase, "every bush and tree is an enemy," was too ridiculous. How could people be confused with plants? Now that he had experienced it himself, he could not tell whether the silhouettes on the other side of the river were humans or plants. A mere 30,000 vanguard battalion, how could they have such might? On the east bank of the E River, Jiang Pengji wore a clean set of armor. Her face was clean, and her eyes were clear. However, the smell of blood lingering around her had yet to dissipate. She said to the soldier who was beating the war drum, "Go down and give it to me." The soldier did not dare to disobey and respectfully handed over a pair of drumsticks. Jiang Pengji took the pair of drumsticks and stood at the position where the drumming soldier was. She weighed the drumsticks and listened to the sound of other drums. She raised her arms and stepped on the rhythm of the drums. Dong, a resounding, thunderous drumbeat rang out. It had the same rhythm as the other drums, but it was louder and more spirited. Dong dong, the drumbeat changed from low and slow to high-pitched and rapid, like a shower of rain, making people's adrenaline surge. Jiang Pengji personally went into battle to beat the drums for the soldiers. Their already high morale was suddenly boosted by a large margin. Listening to the rumbling drums, the audience in the streaming room was in high spirits. They trembled all over, as if an electric current had entered their bodies and made them feel limp and numb. Needless to say, the soldiers at the scene were all excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Across the river, more than 1,000 soldiers boarded wooden rafts and boats and rushed to the other side of the river. Not only were the soldiers of the northern borderline dumbfounded, but the audience in the streaming room was also dumbfounded. Padashiwumi, streamer, don't mess around. You'll be at a disadvantage if you cross the river forcefully like this. Once you enter the enemy's shooting range, you'll be a moving target. Even if the morale is high, you can't be hot-headed and directly cross the river with human heads. That's courting death. On the other side, the soldiers of the northern borderline were already in formation on the riverbank. They steadily pulled their bowstrings. As soon as the soldiers crossed the river, they would shoot arrows randomly. Tudu Feichio, there's no hurry. Even if the streamer is a white lotus, her subordinates, Sun Wen and Feng Zhen, are also black-hearted. Lo Siji Lianmeng, haha, this scene suddenly reminds me of Zhuge Liang capturing Meng Huo 7 times to cross the Lu River. As soon as the bullet screen was released, the soldiers who were the first to cross the river had already passed the center of the Lu River. The army of the northern borderline on the west bank of the Lu River couldn't wait to shoot arrows randomly. Unsurprisingly, all the arrows fell into the water. More than 1,000 soldiers' expressions didn't change. They continued to cross the river, getting closer and closer to the shooting range. Closer and closer, the second wave of arrows from the northern borderline shot randomly. Unexpectedly, the enemy troops who were supposed to be in the shooting range suddenly turned around and rowed their boats, leaving them with a merciless view of their backs. Damn! Jiang Pengji wore a smile on her face. The war drums in her hands were beating even louder and more resounding. Feng Zhen arranged for the second wave of soldiers to board the wooden rafts and boats. His eyes shone with mischief. Most of the boats that crossed the river were seized from the northern borderline. A small number of them were cut down and made in a hurry. What is Lu Shi playing at? The acting king was watching the show with great interest. He was looking forward to thousands of arrows shooting at the enemy troops crossing the river, turning them into a hornet's nest. He didn't expect that after a round of teasing, he would just leave. The acting king was so angry that his eyes widened. The first and second wave of soldiers met up on the river. There were about 3,000 of them in total. They rode slowly towards the west bank. Just as they were about to enter the shooting range, another wave of arrows came from the opposite bank. The soldiers continued to leave, turning around and retreating. Damn it, teasing once wasn't enough, but they were teasing a second time? The acting king was furious. He slammed the handrail of the carriage and cursed. How could he describe this feeling? It was like a man and a woman going to a hotel to get a room, preparing to applaud for their love. After much difficulty, they finally felt something, but one of them had to lift his pants and leave. Once was fine, but there was a second, a third, and a fourth time. The northern borderline was the pitiful one who was being teased. Their already low morale became even more dispirited. The acting king was furious. He simply ordered the soldiers to board the boats. If the mountain doesn't belong to me, then I'll belong to the mountain. I'll beat these bastards to death. But before this order could be given, it was stopped by Halunsha. The acting king can't, why not? The acting king was so angry that he was about to explode on the spot. Halunsha said, I've observed them carefully. They can still maintain a tight formation on the water. They are clearly well-trained sailors. Once they enter the water, our army will only be at a more severe disadvantage. I asked the acting king to think twice. Don't act rashly. Although the northern borderline soldiers could swim, they were cavalry that galloped on land. They weren't sailors, so they were amateurs in water battles. The acting king's face turned green after hearing this. Sun Wen saw the soldiers' performance and was quite surprised. Although the surface of the Ishui River was not wide and it was very different from ordinary rivers and seas, the fact that these soldiers could do this on the water showed that they were comparable to ordinary sailors. Who was the Navy commander who trained them? How could he have the ability to turn something rotten into something magical? Sun Wen asked casually. Jiang Nongqin said, Qi Kuang. Qi Kuang? Chapter 979. Sun Wen couldn't be blamed for not knowing. Qi Kuang only knew how to train the Navy all these years. He was timid, unknown, and had a low presence. That person is not bad. Jiang Nongqin said calmly. Both Shi and Huijun liked to judge based on Jiang Pengji's interests. Qi Kuang was not good-looking and was an eyesore. His legs were crippled, but he was obedient. All these years, he only knew how to work hard and did not bring any trouble to their lord. Unlike Feng Zhen, a prodigal son who always wanted to lead their lord astray, tsk, annoying. Jiang Nongqin did not like Feng Zhen, but their lord liked Feng Langzi, so she could only love him. She did not give Feng Zhen face, but she would not embarrass him. Sun Wen paid attention and continued to observe the situation at Yi River. He muttered to himself, it's fine that Feng Zi is evil, but he also likes to play tricks on people. Compared to Feng Zhen, Sun Wen felt that he was like a pure white lotus flower that had grown out of the mud, fair and clear. He liked to play tricks on people and lead them step by step into a dead end. What about Feng Zhen? Before killing the enemy, he would play with them for a while. When the enemy was about to have a mental breakdown, he would slowly stab the fatal knife. Wu Liba was still recuperating in his tent. When he heard the thunderous drumming outside, he forced his injured body to climb up. Help me out to take a look. Wu Liba was reprimanded many times, but his authority was still there. The soldiers did not dare to disobey. He quietly approached the front line. After observing for a while, Wu Liba thought of a terrifying possibility. Quick, send someone to report to the king. Don't continue to waste arrows. Pay attention to the defense on the left, right, and rear. After saying this, his wound split open. Wu Liba's face turned pale, and his vision dimmed. If not for someone supporting him, he might have fainted on the ground. Wu Liba struggled to break free from the support of the soldiers and said stubbornly, I'm fine. Quickly send someone to report to the king. If we're late, it might be too late. There are too many treacherous people under Lu Shi's command. They can't be doing this just to humiliate us. It's highly possible that they're secretly splitting up their troops and sneaking ashore from the upper and lower reaches of E River. They'll make a detour to attack us. Although they could use this method to deceive their arrows and damage their morale, if they did not attack for a long time, the enemy's morale would also be low. Did he play this game just to fool around? Not entirely. From Wu Liba's point of view, the other party was using this method to attract the attention of the northern borderline barracks so that they would have no time to care about anything else. This was similar to how Wu Liba deceived Zhang Pengji last night with the scarecrow on the empty boat. The difference was that Zhang Pengji did not fall for the trick at all, but the north borderline camp was led by the nose and devoted themselves to it. Wu Liba rubbed his temples, hoping that it was not too late. His words were heard by the acting king, word for word. The acting king shuddered and broke out in a cold sweat. What Wu Liba said made sense. They had almost fallen into his trap. Seeing him in a daze, Halunsha hurriedly called out, "Acting king! Quick, send someone to defend the flanks and the rear. Do not let the Lu family's traitors take advantage of us." The acting king hurriedly gave the order. Halunsha was about to obey the order when one of his subjects stammered. "If what General Wu Liba said is true, there won't be many people ambushing us, right?" The acting king raised his sword-like eyebrows and said gruffly, "Why do you say that?" The subject said, "There are about 30,000 enemy troops on the other side of the river, but Lu Shi's vanguard battalion only has a little more than 30,000 troops. How would they have extra troops to split up and launch a sneak attack?" His words were like a wake-up call. The acting king's expression stiffened. Was there such a thing? He glanced at Halunsha. Halunsha's expression was also dumbfounded. Lu Shi's 30,000 vanguard battalion troops were right under their noses. How would they have extra troops to launch a sneak attack? The answer was, of course there was. The acting king felt that he had been tricked by Wu Liba. When he thought of his reaction just now, he was extremely embarrassed. Send someone to tell that old man to recuperate in peace. Don't try to scare us here. The soldier had no choice but to repeat the acting king's words to Wu Liba. Wu Liba's injuries were not serious, but he had expended a lot of energy and was exhausted. Hearing the acting king call him an old man and say that he was trying to scare them, Wu Liba's shoulders slumped as if his energy had been sucked out of him. Wu Liba sat paralyzed on his sickbed. He looked like he had aged a few years. He muttered, "This fool has ruined the northern borderline." As the sage of the northern borderline, his life's goal was to let the northern borderline's cavalry step on the Han's hinterland and erase the humiliation of his ancestors, the Qiangu tribe. Just as his hegemony was about to be accomplished, a horse plague had beaten the complacent northern borderline back to its original state. Since then, all sorts of tricks had flown out. The king's sons and brothers had a falling out. They killed and framed each other, causing internal strife and unrest in the northern borderline. After that, the ninth prince, who had ascended to the throne, was stupid and cowardly. Was he trying to drag the northern borderline down to hell with him? Overwhelmed with emotion, Wu Liba could not think of the key to his plan for a while. However, at this moment, Zhang Pengji had stirred up trouble. Feng Zhen suggested sending someone to discuss with the enemy on the other side of the river. Zhang Pengji glanced at Feng Zhen. War is not child's play. Take it easy. Although it was a warning, one could tell from her indulgent tone that she was not angry. On the contrary, she agreed. Feng Zhen laughed. You really know the time. It won't delay the military affairs. At the same time, the acting king of the northern borderline suspected that he was deaf. What was the person opposite him saying? Is Lu Shi rushing to die? They had been fooling them for almost 4 hours. Seeing that it was already past lunchtime, the soldiers' stomachs were rumbling with hunger. The acting king was about to sound the gongs to retreat and stop fooling around with Zhang Pengji, but the other side sent someone to make an absurd suggestion. The gist of it was, it's not good for us to confront each other across the river and provoke each other. We haven't even eaten lunch. If we continue to drag this on, no one will be able to back down. Why don't we do it this way? You command your troops to hold back a little so that our troops can get ashore and get into formation. Then we'll have a showdown. How about that? After hearing this, the acting king was completely moved. This was a good thing. We'll beat them at their own game and agree. When half of Lu Shi's troops get ashore, we'll order the cavalry to charge and kill them. Lu Shi's troops will be in a dilemma. When the time comes, the troops will crowd the banks of the Yi River. Those who want to escape won't be able to, and those who want to get ashore won't be able to. They'll definitely lose. As for integrity, this was war. Who cared about integrity and conscience? A little fairy with a conscience would not live long on the battlefield. Halunsha vaguely felt that something was wrong, but no matter how he thought about it, he could not pinpoint what was wrong. Not long ago, he had told the acting king that if the two armies faced off against each other, they could rely on numbers to defeat Lu Shi's 30,000-strong vanguard battalion. If he stopped them from getting ashore now, wouldn't he be slapping himself in the face? Thinking of this, Halunsha remained silent. Chapter 980. Halunsha did not know what was wrong. That was normal. How could Wu Liba, as the wise man of the northern borderline and an experienced general, not know? After 4 hours of teasing and the failure of the sneak attack the night before, the morale of the northern borderline was at rock bottom. If they suddenly ordered the troops to retreat a few miles to make space for Lu Shi's army, could they still maintain their original formation? Once the army's formation was in chaos, they would not be able to organize an effective attack or defense. The enemy's army would land first and launch a strong attack. In this way, even if the enemy only had 30,000 vanguards, they could still win with fewer troops. The acting king planned to sneak attack Jiangpengji when the enemy was halfway to land. Would Jiangpengji be schemed against? It was obvious that there was a trap. Wu Liba was dizzy for a while. He slowly recovered and forced himself to send someone to warn the acting king. Although the acting king was disrespectful to him, Wu Liba could not ignore the overall situation of the northern borderline because of the personal grudge between the king and his minister. The troops serving Wu Liba gritted their teeth and could only obey the order. They could see that the acting king might not appreciate Wu Liba's kind reminder. Not only would he not appreciate it, but he would also humiliate him. Before the troops could send the message, the situation on the battlefield changed drastically. It was too late to send the message. Just as Wu Liba had expected, the northern borderline had a large number of people. Other than 90,000 elites, the remaining 80,000 were militia that had been conscripted at the last minute. The elites could still keep calm and maintain their formation, but the militia that had not gone through much training was different. When the order to retreat was given, the militia was the first to fall into chaos and lose control. People squeezed each other and feet stamped on each other. The formation quickly became chaotic. Seeing the situation, the generals of the northern borderline hurriedly came forward to give orders, hoping to control the increasingly chaotic situation. At that moment, the troops that were swaying on the Yi River seized the opportunity to cross the river and attack the chaotic army. Seeing the situation, the acting king of the northern borderline widened his eyes in shock. He sat in the carriage and shouted, "Quick, meet the enemy." The militia realized that the enemy was crossing the Yi River and became more and more panicked. The situation was even more out of control. To make matters worse, there was a frightening battle cry from the rear of the army. The acting king's face was ashen, as if he could not believe what was happening in front of him. Lu Shi's 30,000 troops were right under his nose. Where did the extra troops come from to attack his rear? Jingtu sure came at the right time, Lian exclaimed in surprise and laughed heartily. Fu Wang arrived with the main force of the army. He quietly sneaked to the rear of the northern borderline and caught the other party off guard. Feng Zhen had sent people to toy with the northern borderline, not only to destroy their morale, but also to attract their attention. Give him a taste of his own medicine. Last night, Wu Liba attempted to create a diversion to attack the main camp. Who would have thought that they would return the favor the next day? It's better to come at the right time than to come early. If we can achieve a great victory, we must reward the whole army generously. As soon as Jiang Pengji said this, the aura of a nouveau riche was unleashed. Fengzhen said, "My lord, you must keep your word. Zhen is waiting." Although he was not Su Ku, he knew that his lord was a filthy rich tycoon. This was a great opportunity that had been delivered to his doorstep. If he didn't ruthlessly beat up the tycoons, wouldn't he be letting himself down? Jiang Pengji's army, which had landed on the shore, launched a fierce attack on the army of the northern borderline. The elite troops of the northern borderline were not to be trifled with. They quickly organized an effective counterattack. A fierce battle broke out between them and the elite troops of Jiang Pengji's vanguard battalion on the riverbank. However, this bit of advantage was quickly overshadowed by the losses at the rear of the northern borderline. Fu Wang led the main force of the Central Army to sneak attack the rear of the northern borderline's main camp. It was as if a sharp knife had ruthlessly stabbed in and cut open the flesh. The head and tail of the northern borderline could not take care of each other. It was a mess. The deputy general who took over Wu Liba's position rode forward and tried to stabilize the situation. He did not expect that the impact of the soldiers in the chaos would be stronger than a flood. The war horse under his crotch was washed away, and he fell to the ground. Before he could get up from the ground, countless pairs of feet trampled over him. In the chaos, how many people were trampled into meat paste? Some people did not even have the chance to wail before they were already dead. Seeing that the situation was not good, the acting king retreated early under the protection of his guards. Even the acting king, who had personally led the troops into battle, had fled. How could the other ministers and generals sit still? How could the soldiers below still have the energy to fight? In an instant, the entire army of the northern borderline retreated in defeat. Wu Liba was deeply worried. Just as he was thinking about how to persuade the acting king and salvage the situation, the soldiers rushed into the tent. "General, our army has been routed. Please escape with me." Wu Liba suddenly got up from his bed, his eyes wide open like copper bells. "What? What do you mean by, our army has been routed?" Hearing the battle cries outside, Wu Liba felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. Suddenly, a group of enemy troops charged at our rear. There are also enemies forcefully coming ashore on the riverbank. Our army can't take care of the front and tail at the same time. Just like that, Wu Liba felt as if he had been hit by an invisible hammer. His body swayed and he took a step back. His face was ashen. "General, let's escape." "It's too late now," the soldiers hurriedly tried to persuade Wu Liba. The acting king had already fled with the ministers. If they did not escape now, they would be abandoned. They fled very quickly and did not care about Wu Liba, who was recuperating at the back. They did not even send anyone to inform him. It was obvious that they were about to give up. In reality, the acting king was in too much of a hurry to escape and did not think of Wu Liba at the moment. Wu Liba clenched his teeth and squeezed out a word. "Go, as long as there's life, there's hope." He could not be buried here. Moreover, he could not watch the north borderline, which he had spent half his life on, be destroyed. The cavalry of the north borderline fled quickly towards the north. The infantry in cloth armor and the militia who were forcibly recruited to make up the numbers were not so lucky. On the battlefield, one could not expose one's back to the enemy even if one was fleeing for one's life. The army of the north borderline fled in a panic, like a headless fly. Fu Wang ordered the cavalry and light infantry to chase after the remnants of the army. They killed and captured, further expanding the results of the battle. The north borderline did not care about their supplies and fled towards the north. They were like birds startled by the mere twang of a bow. They were scared out of their wits at the slightest sign of trouble. "Ha ha ha. This is great. I haven't had such fun in a long time." It was not until dusk that Fu Wang, who was covered in blood, returned on his precious horse. Li Yun, on the other hand, was riding on his precious bye-bye. Seeing Jiang Pengji, Fu Wang immediately dismounted. He did not dare to be arrogant. Your humble servant pays his respects to the Lord. You've worked hard, Zhengtu. We'll reward you according to your contributions later. Jiang Pengji personally helped Fu Wang up and said to the crowd, you've defeated the north borderline and captured countless prisoners. Your names will surely go down in history. To celebrate our great victory, we'll slaughter cows and pigs today to reward the three armies. According to the average marching speed, the main army would need 2 to 3 days to arrive. In order to cooperate with the sneak attack, Fu Wang rushed over in advance. Not only were the north borderline exhausted, but Jiang Pengji's men and horses were also exhausted. The main army that rushed over held their morale and crushed the enemy. Chapter 981. The northern borderline army was defeated and fled. Fu Wang rested for a while and chased them to the Mena tribe on the bank of the Yi River. Because he was worried that the enemy would counterattack and ambush, Fu Wang decisively retreated after a while and collected many spoils of war along the way. The northern borderline army panicked and did not know where to run. Men and horses crowded and trampled over each other. Almost all the way to escape was dead and corpses were everywhere. In the chaos, the acting king was accidentally shot in the shoulder by a stray arrow. The pain made his face pale and he cried out in pain. Acting king, we are safe now. The pursuers did not catch up. Harunsha seemed to have aged a lot. The life and death escape was too exciting. He was covered in dirt and looked very embarrassed. They did not catch up. The acting king looked at Harunsha with a pale face. His heart was beating like a drum and his heart was beating like a storm. Hearing Harunsha's words, the pressure of death that followed him like a shadow was slightly reduced. Send someone to investigate. Did they really not catch up? He was afraid of Jiang Pengji's tricks. He was afraid that the moment he let his guard down, the enemy would appear out of nowhere. Harunsha said, your subject obeys. As soon as he retreated, there was a mournful cry from the sky. When he looked up, he saw a few vigorous eagles fighting in the sky. Ah! Thief Lu has caught up again. The eagle's cry was loud and sharp, piercing through the eardrums. The acting king's nerves were already tense. When he heard the sound, he almost jumped out of the carriage. Harunsha said, reporting to the acting king, a few eagles flew over our heads just now. When the acting king heard this, he recalled his embarrassing performance and suddenly felt embarrassed. He waved his hand tiredly and sent Harunsha away. He really did not want to see Harunsha's face for some time. Who let Harunsha witness his most embarrassing moment? As dusk approached, the fleeing northern borderline soldiers gradually returned to the troops. After sending someone to count the number of people, everyone felt a chill in their hearts. Harunsha even sighed deeply. His eyebrows were full of sorrow and exhaustion. The northern borderline army claimed to have 500,000 soldiers, but in fact, there were only 180,000. 100,000 elites and 80,000 militiamen who were temporarily recruited. Deducting the 10,000 people that Wu Liba lost in the night attack, there were 170,000 left in the camp. After counting, there were less than 60,000 soldiers left. The rest of the soldiers were either dead or captured. The heavens want our Beijiang to perish. Wu Liba had risked his life to escape. When he learned of the outcome, he cried until his eyes were brimming with tears. General, you must not say these words again. If the acting king hears of it, it will not be good for you. The guards who were escorting Wu Liba held him up to prevent him from fainting from the impact. Wu Liba's wounds had ruptured, and his complexion was ashen and lifeless. He swallowed the anger and sorrow in his heart, his fingers trembling as he held the broadsword tightly. You're right, I can't fall yet. A fierce look flashed across Wu Liba's eyes. He asked the soldier, where are we now? The other party said, the Mena tribe. Mena tribe? Wu Liba's lips trembled as he said, so it's here. there were many large rivers in the northern borderline, but there were only so many places with lush pasture. Often, only the most powerful tribes could occupy the places with the most lush pasture and the cleanest water flow. The Mena tribe occupied the most extensive pasture on the banks of the Ishui River. It was ranked highly in the northern borderline. The most important thing was that the Mena tribe was the mother tribe of the third and fifth princes. Wu Liba was the third prince's teacher. Instead of continuing to let the acting king drag the northern borderline to hell, it was better to take the opportunity to launch a coup with his disciple and get rid of the acting king. This audacious thought lingered in his mind, and he couldn't get rid of it no matter what. They fought on an empty stomach and fled for their lives for a day. The northern borderline army also lost a large amount of military supplies. At this moment, they were hungry, tired, and cold along with their horses. In stark contrast to them, Jiang Pengji set up a bonfire. She roasted the fire, ate the meat, and sang and danced. The northern borderline fled in all directions. Jiang Pengji kindly accepted all their logistical supplies. The war horses that were in good condition were captured. Those that were crippled or severely injured were slaughtered and roasted. The entire campsite was red and filled with a lively atmosphere. The soldiers outside rejoiced and danced. A moderate-sized celebration feast was also held in the main tent of the Central Army. Speaking of the celebration feast, everyone was both happy and upset. For a foodie like Yang Si, who only cared about eating and nothing else, this kind of celebration feast couldn't be better. But for normal people, it was a little uncomfortable. Although it was good to have their own entertainment to liven things up and bring everyone closer, it was always like this. Who the hell liked to see a bunch of grown men twisting their waists and shaking their butts? Unexpectedly, their lord had chosen a dancer to liven things up for the first time today. Dancers, dear. Is what the Lord said true? Feng Zhen was the first to brighten up. His entire face lit up. Don't think that he was too frivolous. It was obvious that he was the only one present who was suitable to ask this question. Li Yun had already jumped into the grave of marriage. His wife was the little sister Sheng Wanwan, who was protected by the Lord. Would he dare to be interested in a dancer? Qiguan Rang was also a married man. He was introverted on the inside. Even if his eyes really wanted to see a dancer, he would still maintain a gentlemanly appearance. Sun Wen couldn't say much. He was a grandfather. He had to set a good example for his grandson. He wasn't passionate about women. As for Wei Ci, yes, he had unspeakable feelings for the Lord. Feng Zhen knew very well that this fellow wouldn't jump out. Fu Wang seemed to have deep feelings for Lady Hui. As a man who had been a vegetarian for many years, it was probably not suitable for him to intervene in such a topic. As for Jiang Xiaowei, she was a woman. No matter how good a dancer's figure was, she didn't feel anything. Among everyone present, only Feng Zhen had the right to speak. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "A gentleman keeps his word." He keeps his word. The group of people from the northern borderline fled too quickly. Not only did they lose a lot of supplies, but they also lost a lot of burdens. When our army searched the northern borderline's camp, we found dozens of exotic dancers. Of course, apart from the dancers, there were also a few who claimed to be the concubines of the acting king of the northern borderline. They can also sing and dance. It wasn't easy for us to win the war. We should reward them well. I simply ordered them to write songs and songs to let everyone relax. Everyone watched indifferently. Feng Zhen was wrong. Apart from him, his lord was also very interested in the dancers. Extremely beautiful. I heard that the women of the northern borderline are good at singing and dancing. The dancers who have been meticulously trained are even more charming. Feng Zhen was so happy that he almost grinned to the back of his ears. These dancers were originally carefully raised by the acting king. Now, Jiang Pengji and the others had taken advantage of them. A burst of exotic music sounded. More than 10 extremely sexy dancers with revealing clothes stepped in from outside the tent. Each of them was like a nimble fish. They passed through the gaps in the tent as if they had no bones. Their bare feet stepped on the soft animal skin cushions. The facial features of the people from the northern borderline were more defined and deep. They carried the passion and boldness that was rare for Han girls. They were like a raging flame. Chapter 982. Other than Feng Zhen, Jiang Pengji, and the audience in the streaming room, who were engrossed in watching, everyone else seemed disinterested. They lowered their heads and ate. They had lived a simple life for too long and were used to dull banquets. Faced with the delicacies in front of them, they felt bored. Gui kai guo fengxiao, Aya, it's not bad to be able to cross over. If I could be as successful as the host, I would be able to rule the world and sleep with beauties. Just thinking about it made him envious. The ladies were really good-looking, as beautiful as flowers and jade. The faces of the Han women were delicate and reserved, and their facial features were relatively plain. The beauties of the northern borderline were more profound and more in line with the aesthetic standards of the audience. Her face was secondary. The key was her breasts and buttocks. They were protruding in both the front and the back. It felt good just by looking at them. Qing Luo you under the moon, #pick nose, you said it yourself. If you are as good as the streamer, what if you don't? Yu Chao Muhui, the greatest enjoyment of watching a live broadcast is seeing a group of naturally beautiful young ladies. It cured my face blindness for many years. The audience was talking all at once. The rhythm of the musicians playing their instruments was sometimes passionate and high-pitched, and sometimes it was as if they wanted to refuse or speak. It was as if there was a slender hand gently teasing the softest heartstrings in their hearts, faintly discernible and indistinct. Jiang Pengji smiled and extended her hand to the dancer in the middle. The dancer's eyes sparkled and the corners of her lips curled up slightly. She walked forward with cat-like steps and extended her right hand. Hands as soft as silk, as fine as cream. Jiang Pengji smiled and praised them in front of everyone. The leading dancer smiled brightly, but the others' faces darkened. Qiguan Rang stole a glance at his lord, while Feng Zhen stole a glance at Wei Ci. Since ancient times, it was only men who flirted around and flirted with other women. When had women ever flirted around? However, it was their lord's fault for being different from others. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with her. The dancers performed a few celebratory group dances. Apart from Jiang Pengji and Feng Zhen, who were enjoying the show, the others were expressionless. What do you think? Jiang Pengji didn't get enough of it even after the female dancer left. She asked her subordinates cordially. Feng Zhen rushed to say, the dance is beautiful, but the person is even more beautiful. The others remained silent. Jiang Pengji said, I think so too. The battle at the northern borderline would take at least a year and a half if they were optimistic. The pressure on the soldiers was too great. In my opinion, it would be better to let these dancers perform occasionally. On one hand, it would reward the entire army, and on the other hand, it would relieve the pressure from the festive songs and dances. There were no psychologists in this era. Even if the soldiers had emotional problems, they could only rely on themselves to mediate. Jiang Pengji planned to set up a song and dance troupe and occasionally perform a few performances to liven things up. She wanted to relieve the emotional stress of the soldiers through entertainment. Everyone was speechless when they heard this. They thought that their lord simply liked the color of the dancers, but they didn't expect that her mind was actually thinking about serious matters. In comparison, Feng Zhen, the prodigal son, was at a disadvantage in terms of thinking. Fu Wang frowned and said disapprovingly, My lord, won't this destroy the military discipline? The military camp was a proper place. Why did they let these dancers dance and sing? Isn't it too pedantic to say that? Jiang Pengji said, except for a few veterans, most of the soldiers who followed our army into battle are decent citizens. Not to mention killing people, some of them had never even slaughtered a chicken or duck. Now that I've killed someone, I'm secretly afraid. His sword-like eyebrows were tightly knitted together, leaving a few wrinkles between his brows. Fu Wang still remembered the scene of him killing someone for the first time, but he didn't feel afraid or hesitant. His lord worried too much. If you're afraid of even this, how can you survive? The swords and knives have no eyes on the battlefield. Jiang Pengji smiled but didn't say anything. Anyway, it's settled. Just treat it as an extra benefit that I'm planning for the soldiers. Fu Wang was helpless. After all, she was the lord. As long as it didn't involve a serious issue of principle, almost no one would stop her. Taking 10,000 steps back, she was doing it for the sake of the soldiers. After a simple celebratory feast, everyone went about their business. Although they had won a great victory that day, they still had to sort out the spoils of war, settle and guard the captives, and count the number of casualties. In addition, the soldiers were also unbearably tired. If they weren't immersed in the joy of victory, they might have found a place to lie down and sleep. Everyone left one after another. Jiang Pengji specially asked Wei Xi to stay behind. Before Feng Zhen left, he winked at Wei Xi. Qiguan Rang gave him a pitiful look. The former's eyes said, "Seize the opportunity," while the latter's eyes said, "Take care." Wei Xi was speechless. Zixiao, Jiang Pengji held Wei Xi's hand. It wasn't as soft and warm as a woman's. Instead, it was a little hard. Wei Xi lowered his eyelids and his gaze fell on her hand. He opened his thin lips slightly and asked calmly, "Is the Lord comparing the feel of the two?" At that moment, the live stream room hadn't closed yet. The audience watched the development in horror. They were stunned for a second, then they cried out, "Little Ding Ding who drifts with the waves, did I miss an important plot? Why does Beauty Ci accept being touched by the streamer without any ill feelings?" In the past, not to mention touching hands, she even had to reprimand or avoid flirting. Red Spider Lily, don't ask me. I don't know either. Jiang Pengji asked, "Zixiao, are you jealous?" Wei Xi said, "She's just a woman. There's nothing to be jealous of." If he was jealous of even this, he would have drowned in a vat of vinegar in his previous life. It was strange. Her Majesty and men were close friends, but women always harbored ill intentions toward her. "Tsk. Look at how calm you look. You've seen through it," Jiang Pengji said. "You're used to big storms and big waves." Her words had a double meaning. Wei Xi was not as panicked as before. He had a hunch that the person in front of him had not only exposed his identity, but she had also speculated a lot about his previous experiences. "As long as you like it," Wei Xi said. Qingha, what is going on in Beauty Ci's mind at this moment? As a man who can surf in the sea of vinegar, he is fearless. Zixiao is too cold. I'm not happy. Jiang Pengji reached out to him. I'll only be happy if you kiss and hug me. Wei Xi blushed silently. How could she be so blatant? It wasn't that his level wasn't high enough, it was just that the person he met was too high. My lord, stop fooling around. Wei Xi paused and added, this is a military camp. It's fine as long as it's not a military camp. Wei Xi said. That won't do either. Was Her Majesty so glib in her previous life? She was clearly very quiet, solemn, and serious. We won a big victory today. Shouldn't you give me something to encourage me? Jiang Pengji reached out to Wei Xi. He was silent. He took out something from his sleeve and placed it in her palm. It was a small and delicate private seal. The private seal only had one word, Peng. In another place, Feng Zhen was swaying and planning to go to sleep. Seeing Qiguan Rang turn back to look at the main tent, he put a hand on his shoulder. What a scandal. Qiguan Rang removed his hand from his face. Speaking of which, isn't it the 19th anniversary of the Lord's birthday? Qiguan Rang raised his eyebrows. Just say what you want to say. You mean they? Feng Zhen raised his eyebrows. He had an expression that said all men understood. That's the Lord. Qiguan Rang's expression darkened. His dark eyes carried a bit of sternness. Feng Langzi, watch your words and actions. Feng Zhen was not afraid of him. He said, I'm not being disrespectful to the Lord. I'm just worried about one thing. The Lord is a woman. Who will inherit her family business? If there was no heir, for the officials, they would be like rootless duckweed. Their hearts would be unstable. Chapter 983. Feng Zhen suddenly asked, what if Zixiao oversteps his bounds? Qiguan Rang glanced at Feng Zhen, his eyes seemingly surging with an unseen undercurrent. If he dares to overstep his bounds, even the Lord won't be able to protect him. The Lord was the Lord, and the subjects were the subjects. If the subjects forgot their duties and used their intimate relationship to become domineering and do things that were not in line with the rules, such as overstepping their bounds and reversing the status of the Lord and subject, even if the Lord was willing to spoil them, the subordinates would not sit idly by. Qiguan Rang lowered his voice. It was a normal tone, but it made people feel an inexplicable chill. Ah, don't be so serious, Wen Zheng. I was just asking casually. Feng Zhen laughed. Zixiao will know his limits. Qiguan Rang said, I hope so. He had been watching from the sidelines all these years, and his lord was probably serious. Based on her temperament, the more she was not allowed to do something, the more she liked to be stubborn. It was useless to go against her. On the other hand, if something happened between the Lord and Wei Xiai, they would not have to worry about the young master in the future. The northern borderline lost badly in the Battle of Yi River. The acting king personally led the army but did not achieve the desired effect. Instead, he brought a group of defeated soldiers to the Mena tribe. Although they were defeated soldiers, after many rounds of rest, there were still 60,000 remaining soldiers. The Mena tribe could not resist at all. The third prince looked at the acting king patiently. Seeing the other's arrogant expression, he couldn't help but want to mock him. Wasn't the ninth prince quite capable? He defeated his brothers and became the acting king, but in the end, he almost couldn't even keep his pants. However, even if he said these words for a while, it was very likely to bring a disaster to the Mena tribe, so he forcibly endured it. The northern borderline army fled in a hurry and did not take any military supplies with them. Now, 60,000 mouths were waiting for the Mena tribe to feed them. When the third prince heard the acting king confidently asking him to take out food and wine, he almost exploded in anger. This ninth prince, the third prince, was full of anger and angrily vented it on the decorations in the house. Your Highness, someone sent an invitation. Who sent it? The third prince casually pulled it over and opened the invitation. His gaze fell on the inscription. Teacher Wuliba. Why was the other party looking for him? The third prince was suspicious, but he did not dare to be negligent. After a short rest, he secretly met with Wu Liba. When he saw Wu Liba, the third prince could not believe his eyes. This was his teacher? In the memory of the third prince, his teacher, Wu Liba, was a middle-aged man. Although he was a man from the northern borderline, he had an unspeakable scholarly air. Regardless of the situation, he always looked calm and composed, as if everything was under his control. In the past, the third prince was attracted by the other party's disposition and willingly acknowledged the other party as his teacher, learning the Han culture of the Central Plains. Now that he looked at it again, he almost couldn't recognize it. Because of his injuries and his repeated outbursts, Wu Liba's complexion was not good. His brows were deeply furrowed, his hair was gray, and his face was wrinkled, revealing his true age. He looked miserable and downtrodden. In any case, the third prince still respectfully called him teacher. His voice also pulled Wu Liba out of his memories. Get up, Wu Liba glanced at the third prince. Contrary to him, this disciple of his was doing very well in his mother's tribe. I asked you to come here today because I want to discuss something with you. This is something that I need to ask for your opinion on. The third prince was suspicious, but he said, "Teacher, please say it. If I can use my disciple, I will not refuse." "Do you want to be the next king?" Wu Liba asked bluntly. The third prince's heart suddenly trembled and he almost bit his tongue. What did his own teacher say? Asking him if he wanted to be the next king? Of course he did. Even in his dreams. If he could replace the ninth prince as the next king, who would be qualified to run to the Mena tribe to show off? However, he was not sure why Wu Liba asked this. Wu Liba originally hated the infighting among the princes. Why did he suddenly ask if he wanted to fight for the position of the next king? The third prince could not figure out Wu Liba's thoughts and intended to test him. How could his thoughts escape Wu Liba's eyes? Wu Liba asked gruffly, "I'm only asking if you want to or not." The third prince smiled bitterly. "It's not that I don't understand my students, but how can I not know my students' thoughts? Who doesn't want the position of the next king?" Wu Liba sighed. "If I had known that the ninth prince was like this, I would have helped you ascend to the throne." The third prince asked, "Teacher, what happened?" Wu Liba looked tired as he recounted the night attack last night and the battle at Yi River during the day. He said, "I was careless and caused the destruction of more than 10,000 elites. This is my fault. But the acting king did not listen to my advice and acted arbitrarily. Sooner or later, the entire northern borderline will be lost." The third prince listened and could not help but tremble in fear. He saw the acting king and the defeated soldiers and guessed that the northern borderline would lose badly, but he did not expect it to be like this. In this way, Lu Shi was not easy to deal with at all. Instead, he was a tiger and a wolf. "Teacher, do you mean to think of a way to depose the acting king?" Wu Liba sighed. He said, "To prevent the morale of the army from being disrupted, even if we want to depose the acting king, we can't do it openly. We have to find a plausible excuse. I have some connections in the army. If we use them well, we will definitely succeed." The army of the northern borderline had just experienced a great defeat. Their morale had hit rock bottom and they could not climb back up. If news of the sudden death of the acting king were to spread, it was inevitable that the army would panic. According to Wu Liba's plan, he wanted the acting king to suffer a stroke and be unable to manage the political affairs. Then, he would push the third prince to take over. The third prince held back his wildly beating heart and said excitedly, "I'll follow your arrangements." After the battle at Yi River, not only did Jiang Pengji's army not follow up on their victorious pursuit, but they chose a high ground to set up camp. This action made Wu Liba heave a sigh of relief, but at the same time, he had other worries. He always felt that Jiang Pengji was secretly stirring up trouble. The facts proved that Jiang Pengji was really stirring up trouble. Wei Ci could only sigh. His Majesty really had an irreconcilable hatred with the northern borderline. In his previous life, when Her Majesty attacked the northern borderline, she really wanted to kill them. At that time, the northern borderline was prosperous and powerful. The population was close to 2 million. The two sides fought hard for a year and a half, and the northern borderline had less than 500,000 people. With such a ferocious battle record, many people called her the butcher behind her back. When the Jiang dynasty was unified, Her Majesty specially ordered the foreign tribes in the northern borderline who met the requirements to be moved to various places in the Central Plains. Then, the poor people of the Central Plains were moved to the northern borderline to graze and plant trees. Every household was given a certain amount of government subsidies. Compared to the dense population of the Central Plains, the foreign tribes in the northern borderline were completely diluted and assimilated in no time. Wei Ci did not die of old age, but judging from the situation of the Jiang dynasty, there was no need to worry about the foreign tribes becoming strong and threatening the Central Plains for the next 200 years. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.